Chapter 234. Luo Nan had no way of doing anything after the low-quality imitation human-faced arachnid entered the dark cloud. He could see how it operated on the level of human energy and information, but it was very difficult to operate it. It was the same as throwing a listening device inside. Whether or not it would be effective depended on a bit of luck. Right now, the spiral arm of the dark cloud was smeared with complex emotions. It was like a swaying poisonous mushroom, but it was not completely transparent. Luo Nan felt that it was still lacking a bit. He needed to wait. Luo Nan did not place all his hopes on the human-faced arachnid. His attention returned to Frost River reality. The battle between Fairchild and Baze was not that loud. Luo Nan often forgot about their existence. It was hard to imagine how these two experts, who were proficient in body techniques, fought. However, when the Galaxy Clairvoyance system was set up, it was impossible for Luo Nan to ignore it even if he wanted to. This was because the brightest cluster of stars was right there. This was a very interesting phenomenon. The most eye-catching constellation in Luo Nan's life sketch was that of Fairchild. Luo Nan wanted to successfully analyze Fairchild's super strength. It was an impossible task. However, Fairchild had revealed to Luo Nan the profundities of the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. Fairchild's body was grand and imposing. There was little concealment, so Fairchild's life sketch was clearly displayed. It was obviously impossible to simplify it to the level of cat eyes. However, its structure was complex and it lit up many stars. As a result, Luo Nan could sense an astonishing brightness and sense of existence amidst the splendid galaxy. It was because of Fairchild that the 8 Ablatum Knights, including Baze, were affected. The nebula dust that covered their bodies would be torn off from time to time, exposing some of the deeper mysteries. Luo Nan pondered. Through this, he could use it as a reference to pry into the Order of Justice's first ablatum. He just needed a bit more time. But at this time, Huayin issued a new order in the encrypted channel. 1 o'clock direction, 50 meters. Go through exit number 3. Luo Nan and the others, who had been moving forward, discovered that they had unknowingly arrived at another exit of Frost River reality. This exit was connected to the Bearing building. They could enter Block B of the connected building from here. In other words, they would be able to leave this dangerous area that they had been in for a long time. Zhang Yingying, who was leading the way, couldn't help but say in the channel, "Hey, aren't there still 100 people who can't be saved?" Huayin replied, "The mission target is the Order's gunmen. Luo Nan already killed them all, okay. There are at least 10 people inside the 3 buildings." From the current intelligence, other than the Officiant and the Ablatum Knights, there were still 3 to 4 groups of people in the Order that were not under control. Yulan Hotel has confirmed that it's the sniper team. There are also operation teams in the 3 surrounding buildings. Zhang Yingying had been curious about this question for a long time. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, what's the point of killing the gunmen? First Ablatums and Ablatum Knights are the real deal. The gunmen will cause more civilian casualties. Hey, you're saying that a secret-bound First Ablatum and 2 clear-sworn First Ablatums are no match for a few gunmen? For now, yes. After a few consecutive questions and answers, Zhang Yingying was very dissatisfied with Huayin's answers. Just as she was about to put in more effort, the Red Fox, who had not appeared in the encrypted channel for a long time, suddenly interjected. The direct interference of the mentally enhanced with the material plane is rather limited before becoming an extraordinary. The direct killing power of a mental storm may not be comparable to a metal bullet. And the First Ablatum's weapons are currently at Frost River reality. They are under Fairchild's control. This makes it very difficult for the First Ablatum's energy to deviate by a large margin. Huayin continued Red Fox's message. Right now, there are at least 30 to 50,000 citizens in the 3 buildings. These people can't take fright. If a stampede were to occur, the consequences would be unthinkable. To accomplish this, the gunmen just need to pull the trigger. And we can't afford to pay this price. Luo Nan had to admit that Yuan and Red Fox's words made some sense. However, the two of them had just been bickering with each other, and now they were singing the same tune. How could the other people, who had their own standpoints, endure this? Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed. Compared to Yuan and Red Fox's train of thought, his thoughts were a bit too presumptuous. Even if he drew out the life sketches of the three first oblatums, it would not be of any substantial help in resolving the current situation. Then should he adjust and search for the gunman? But this would require a large increase in the precision of his senses. Luo Nan realized that he might not have this ability. While Luo Nan was thinking about his own conundrum, Zhang Yingying's thoughts were more practical. How long would it take to circle the three buildings? Yuan answered as if it were a matter of course, we are only responsible for building B. The military will be responsible for buildings A and C. The encrypted channel was immediately shocked. Papercut asked, the military. The military is personally taking action. Oh right, that flying shuttle just now. Zhang Yingying also shouted, I knew it. How could there be such a coincidence? You were the one who gave the order to prove Ghost Thunder, right? Did you use your personal connections? Yuan herself had a solid military background. This was no secret in the society. However, aside from her military accomplishments, she rarely displayed her personal connections during her time in the society. This sudden mention really caught people off guard. Yuan did not immediately respond to this question. Zhang Yingying would not let her go. Hey, wouldn't bringing in the military complicate the situation? Secretary Yuan was 2 seconds late. Then she said, it's official cooperation. Yuan no longer paid attention to this topic. She directly said, enter building B in half a minute. Red Fox, Bamboo Pole, and Papercut are still responsible for Yulan. Pay attention. According to the requirements, we need to deal with the gunman within 300 seconds. A countdown interface was added to the encrypted channel at the same time the information was transmitted. Right now there were only 295 seconds left. The sudden addition of elements made everyone stunned. Papercut was faced with this unreasonable mission. He said in astonishment, we'll need more than this amount of time to run back. Right when he was doubtful, Red Fox turned around and left without a word. Bamboo Pole pulled him and sped up to catch up. It was as if Papercut had just woken up from a dream. He increased the force of his feet, but he still wanted to ask, it's not even 5 minutes. What if we can't do it? We'll implement the emergency plan in 285 seconds. It's impossible to predict what will happen when the time comes. Speed up. Yuan urged the team to advance quickly. At the same time, she laid out the next steps of the operation. After Special Police Squadron 2 enters Building B, you will be responsible for guiding and maintaining order. Everyone else, with the floor you entered as the boundary, Mr. Luo, Yingying, and White Salt will form a team and head down. Cat Eyes and I will form a team and head up. Quickly search and deal with the gunmen. Contact them at any time. After 270 seconds, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, we will immediately descend from a high altitude and leave the range of the triangular building complex. Every time she mentioned the number of seconds, it was in coordination with the countdown interface. She reminded everyone that the arrangements were constantly consuming time. The group of people were doing their best to digest this information when Yuan specifically said to Luo Nan, Mr. Luo, you must focus your energy. Don't get distracted. Luo Nan was stunned when he heard the hidden meaning in her words. But at this time, he faintly heard a piece of information. It seemed to be a sigh of regret, but it also seemed to be a mockery. Chapter 235. Luo Nan's mind suddenly slanted. This piece of information that had no head or tail did not originate from any member of the team. It did not seem to be directed at any member of the team either. It just soared through the air and reverberated within his mind. He was stupefied for a moment before realizing that there was progress on the human-faced arachnid side. He clairvoyantly observed the dark cloud above the spiral arm of the Star River. He could clearly feel that the density of the dark cloud was decreasing. More and more blurry starlight was reflected. There was even some energy information that was deciphered and analyzed through the human-faced arachnid. Those few words did not seem to be the real-time dynamic of a conversation. It was more like the intense obsession of a certain person's heart, causing the relevant information to grow and accelerate endlessly. It looked like the person within the dark cloud was in a bad mood. He raised his head to look up. Through the metal frame and the transparent glass ceiling, he could see the silhouette of the pitch-black and lightless tall building. It was vaguely similar to the dark cloud in his senses. In reality, the group of people were rushing towards a dark cloud. Moreover, it was the target that Luo Nan was targeting. The color of the light was constantly changing, nearly turning into a poisonous mushroom. Or maybe it was a coincidence. Luo Nan's gaze locked onto a corner of the building. He could not see any clues with his naked eye, but he could feel the malice hidden deep within the air on the mental plane. It grew clearer and clearer as he got closer. Even though He Yuan had warned him not to get distracted, what if he was under the interference of a first ablatum? Luo Nan sent a message in the encrypted channel. It seems like we're being watched. It's that fellow who talks too much. He Yuan's reply was filled with the flavor of a matter of course. As long as we're in one of the 3 buildings, we'll certainly be watched by at least one first ablatum. Don't worry. Don't get distracted. This was the second time He Yuan had warned him. Right now Luo Nan's feet were practically not touching the ground. He was being carried by Shuelei and Cat Eyes as they sprinted through the connecting passageway. Shuelei moved close to his ear and said, "You didn't arrange for me just now. You must follow Uncle." He Yuan suddenly asked before Luo Nan could finish speaking, "Has Shuelei already obtained the talisman?" "I just made small progress in the past 2 days." "Huh?" Shuelei was suddenly stunned. He turned his head to look, He Yuan didn't respond. Instead, she issued another order in the encrypted channel. Shuelei and Mr. Luo will be in a team. According to the time limit, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, you must quickly leave the vicinity of the building. Shuelei didn't say anything, but Shuelei was startled. Just as he was about to speak, a message flashed through the encrypted channel. "Hey, Sister Nun, it seems like you're using awakened ones as your criteria. Is this some sort of arrangement by the society?" The one who sent the message was Bai Xinyan, but there was no response from He Yuan. Shuelei's words were blocked by this message. In the face of a completely unknown background, making wild guesses and suspicions was one of the worst things a special police officer could do. It was the same for his father's identity. At this time, the group of people had already entered Building B. The special police formation automatically dispersed. Cat Eyes flashed out of the group and stood together with He Yuan. Zhang Yingying pulled Bai Xinyan over. She grabbed Luo Nan and Shuelei. "Do you know why you need to concentrate?" The 2 high school students shook their heads. "What happens next will be very exciting." Zhang Yingying blinked. She was just about to say something when she saw Shuelei walking over. She shut her mouth and walked to the side with Bai Xinyan. Luo Nan also hurriedly stepped aside, giving the father and son some time to talk. However, the conversation between the father and son of the Shui family was much more straightforward than they imagined. The 2 men, who were both equally majestic, hugged each other heavily. Even though there was a thick layer of exoskeleton armor between them, it didn't matter. "Do your best. Be careful." There wasn't much time to talk during the continuous countdown. Before their voices could fade away, the glass wall adjacent to the entrance shattered with a bang. The glass fragments flew down and a gale whistled in. Zhang Yingying looked down. The slope is okay. It's not the straight up or down type. At that moment, Shuelei could feel his father's arms tightening around him. He grinned and broke free. Don't worry. Zhang Yingying turned her head to look. Shuelei has tried descending from a high building before. Shuelei maintained his confident smile. The gym master taught me the jumping ape technique. I've also practiced a bit of extreme parkour. I've tried it on a high floor, but the distance wasn't very long. Excellent. Zhang Yingying gave him a thumbs up. With a burden like Luo Nan, weight salt, and I will definitely have to spend a large amount of energy on him. You need to be careful. It's time for a martial artist to crush a mentally enhanced dregs. Zhang Yingying was halfway through her words when a figure flashed by her side. He Yueyin and Cat Eyes practically leaped up shoulder to shoulder. They braved the gale and leaped into the dark void. Their figures flipped and they flew up. They only left a message in the encrypted channel. Hurry up. They didn't have the chance to carefully plan due to the urgency of time. At this time, it depended on whether or not their daily habits were efficient. Right now, the power outage of the building and the elevator were out of service. They wanted to complete the entire journey in less than 4.5 minutes. According to the society's usual practice, they relied on the skills of ability users to play fast ascending and descending. He Yueyin didn't choose Luo Nan to go up. This fellow's terrible physical skills were probably one of the important reasons. Zhang Yingying shrugged. She wasn't in a hurry. She knew from the moment He Yueyin arranged the mission that the intensity of this group's mission was much easier. The specific plan of action naturally had to be sent to the encrypted channel. Luo Nan's sensing radius is 80 meters. Building B's width is around 150 meters. Just make a spiral around the building. If everything goes smoothly, we only need 100 seconds to set foot on Fudong Main Street. Luo Nan was astonished. That's fast. I won't be able to lock onto the gunman in time. The terrain and angle of the lower floors are meaningless. The possibility of a gunman is too small. The secretary just wants us to retreat. Are you ready? Me and the big guy will go first. Shuelei shuddered. The confident smile on his face was a bit stiff. But no matter what, he couldn't let others, especially his father, see this. It would only cause him to worry. He silently recited the mnemonic that the gym master had personally taught him. Transform the water and fire into a discipline. He began to encourage himself. I'm different from normal people. I'm really different. Chen Xiaolan's face miraculously flashed in his mind. Then it dissipated like a bubble. The yin and yang within his body rose and fell. His body, which had been eroded by the gale within the darkness, recovered its warmth. The little bit of hesitation and absent-mindedness melted away into nothing. Shuelei was even more certain that he was born for this sort of scene. He tilted his head slightly and locked gazes with Luo Nan beside him. This was the friend who had drawn him into this wonderful world. The two punched each other. Let's go. As Shuelei shouted, he leaped into the dark void outside. Zhang Yingying also leaped out of the building at practically the same time as him. Then came Bai Xinyan, who was holding onto Luo Nan's waist with one arm. Shuo Weiluan followed closely behind them. He stuck his head out to look and just happened to see his son. His son was more agile than any ape or monkey. His long arms slapped the glass wall a few times to borrow strength. It was as if he was riding a skateboard as he flew all the way down. Several figures quickly disappeared into the curtain of night. Chapter 236. At the center of the rooftop of Building B, a gear-like structure hummed as it revolved. It constructed an intricate and marvelous formation. Rays of light weaved together like a cocoon, wrapping Enchanting within. With this layer of cover, Enchanting could no longer hide his ashen face. He ground his teeth heavily. His thoughts were completely on the building beneath his feet. He was on the damned members of the society who made him feel as if his heart and lungs were on fire. As a sworn first oblatum, he could be considered a mentally enhanced in a certain sense. However, his mental senses were never his forte. He needed to use the divination domain to lock onto a target several hundred meters away, separated by several dozen layers of reinforced concrete. However, as long as his consciousness existed in the divine play domain, for a moment, Enchanting's evaluation seemed to linger in his mind. How unsightly. Enchanting's words were as light and subtle as usual. They were worth pondering. But this time, the most superficial meaning was enough to make Enchanting feel as if he had been slapped in the face. His entire face was wooden. He stood within the magic array, but he felt as if he was imprisoned in a cage. The gazes of the surrounding people turned extremely strange. Actually, the priests and members of the order were far from being able to access information from the divination domain. It was very difficult for them to know what the first oblatums were doing and what they were communicating with each other. However, Enchanting still felt terrible. He had a feeling that Enchanting's words had spread far and wide. Correspondingly, his performance as the judge personally appointed by Enchanting had spread far and wide. This was completely different from what he had imagined. He had never thought that this half-grown child named Luo Nan would be so thorny. Other things aside, Luo Nan's soul strength was extremely thick. Most importantly, it formed its own system. The so-called format pyramid appeared to be illusory and indistinct, but it was like a layer of irritating curtains. It acted as a buffer for penetrating power on the mental plane. Enchanting had tried to use his power time and time again, but he wasn't confident that he would succeed in one strike. He could only keep accumulating power. He hesitated for a long time, waiting for the military to activate the ghost bomb with great difficulty. Enchanting then took advantage of this opportunity. He used the Oblatum Knight as a carrier to find an opportunity to kill the enemy in one strike. But who would have thought that just as the accumulated power was about to take effect, it was chopped off by that damned secretary. He himself suffered a backlash, and his soul was shaken. He still hadn't calmed down. The most damned thing was that Luo Nan and his secretary had mocked him by name after the fact. And this was a one-sided situation where they had guessed correctly about his identity. A great humiliation. If this matter were to spread, then he, Enchanting, would become an eternal laughingstock in Xia City and even in the Order of Justice. He would never be able to survive. At this moment, Enchanting only wanted to avenge his humiliation. The people from the association had already passed through the connecting passageway and entered Building B. Building B was good, he was in Building B. There were 3 connected buildings. The height of the buildings was around 700 meters. They were connected to Frost River Reality in the center. Following the arrival of Luo Nan's group, the straight-line distance between the 2 sides had already shrunk to less than 400 meters. The enemy had even divided their forces. A heaven-sent opportunity. Enchanting began to mobilize the power of the divination domain. However, just as he started, Enchanting's thoughts cut in and seized all the authority of the divination domain. The projection of the scales of truth in the center of the Great Triangle forcefully attracted the attention of every officiator. The position of the white scale on the classical pendulum scale was lifted up by a bit, and the black scale correspondingly fell down. It looked like the state of imbalance had been corrected. The winding and rotating posture of the kite on the black scale was more lively than it was at the beginning. This showed that the ritual had made great progress. Enchanting was shocked at first when his authority was seized, but his face burned when he saw this scene. It was reasonable to say that Enchanting had personally appointed him to judge Luo Nan with the ultimate goal of breaking the order that Luo Nan had formed. He wanted to release the elements of pain and chaos and make the scales of truth reach equilibrium. Now that there was great progress, Enchanting should be happy. But the problem was, how much of this was due to him? Enchanting had been affected by the secretary's decapitation, and most of the power he had accumulated had been dissipated. Although he had frightened the citizens of Frost River reality out of their wits, the chaotic elements of the 100 or so people couldn't be considered a weight at all. What truly affected the scales of truth was the panic of the surrounding citizens caused by the power outage of the 3 buildings. And the reason for all this was because Enchanting had given an order to the action team. He hadn't used any supernatural powers. Enchanting felt that Enchanting was a fool when he compared the two. However, Enchanting wasn't too satisfied with the current situation. It's still a bit lacking. Perhaps I've placed too much of a foundation on the scales of truth. I still need to make up for it. Sheng Xiao, who was on the other side of the building, really wanted to ask. Just what was the foundation that Enchanting had placed? But at this time, Enchanting, who was anxious to save face, couldn't wait to say, "Leave it to me, Enchanting. This time, I will definitely get rid of those people from the society. You only have one chance, child." Enchanting's thoughts were gentle and firm. Only those familiar with him knew that the deepest layer of his thoughts was a callousness akin to an iceberg at the bottom of the sea. Mending the pen after the sheep is lost is not a flock of sheep, but a fence. Its purpose is none other than order. As Enchanting spoke, the scene under the projection of the scales of truth quickly changed. It swept over a dense crowd. These people were scattered across the 3 connected buildings. Because of the sudden darkness, they were bewildered and uneasy. However, as time passed, human instincts to adapt to the environment came into play. The convenient and efficient information system of modern society was also the embodiment of rules and order. As the government sent targeted information to all the trapped citizens and instructed them to evacuate, the panic of the people gradually subsided. Tens of thousands of citizens were evacuated from the fire escape and emergency evacuation exits. In modern metropolises, high-rise commercial buildings were often connected by high-altitude stairs and conveyor belts. They were like long vines that extended and entangled in a primeval forest. This also made it convenient for evacuation during emergencies. At this time, people were flowing out of these tunnels like ants. Due to the proper distribution of information, the overall situation was quite stable. However, this also caused the imbalance of the scales of truth to become more serious. Seeing the white scales move down again, not to mention Sheng Xiao, even Enchanting, who hadn't been very focused all this time, couldn't help but divert some of his attention. If the imbalance couldn't be transformed into a balanced state, it meant that the spellcasting had failed. The 3 of them would suffer a serious backlash. This was much more tragic than the one caused by the secretary earlier. One order, one world. Enchanting sighed softly. I like order. Order is the brightest path to the truth. But sometimes, we must abandon the low-level parts and replace them with the high-level parts. To use the low-level world as a ladder to the high-level world. Enchanting. Sheng Xiao felt that something was wrong. Enchanting's request to cut off the power to the 3 buildings was very inappropriate. And according to what Enchanting had just said, wasn't it a step further? A step further. What step was it? Enchanting's response was clear. Before order, there must be disorder. New birth must be accompanied by destruction. Before the thought was extinguished, a dazzling radiance exploded within Frost River reality. The shockwave instantly flattened the glass wall on one side. 7 or 8 human silhouettes scattered amidst the flying shards of glass that filled the sky. They were thrown towards the 3 connected buildings. Chapter 237. Enchanting. Sheng Xiao's thoughts trembled. His emotions were panicked. He wanted to yell at Enchanting, "We've completely crossed the line. Everything that had happened before could be explained by the fact that they had no regard for the civilians during the fierce battle with Fairchild. They could even make a countercharge by saying that the enemy's choice of battlefield was unprofessional. This was a common occurrence. But if they stubbornly insisted on doing things their own way, directly tearing apart the bottom line of the government's social governance, they would blindly terrorize and expand. How would they be any different from the vagrant organizations in the wilderness? If they truly angered the Star Alliance Committee or even the local powers, many parties would unite to denounce them. Even the First Oblatum Assembly would find it difficult to absolve them. And Qingli was also panicking. His thoughts were similar to Jing Zhao's, but he was even more advanced. Once the matter was investigated, and Wang was old and experienced. He did not care about anything. The Oblatum Knights only needed to carry out the mission. Those gunmen might not even be able to keep their lives. In the end, only he and Jing Zhao would be left to bear the blame. And with his previous terrible performance, it was very likely that he would suffer even more losses. No matter how uncomfortable Jing Zhao and Qingli felt, the situation would not return to zero. As gunfire wildly pulsed in the darkness, the truly terrifying Oblatum Knights frantically accelerated atop the triangular spaceship. They leaped into the air, their targets the three surrounding buildings. The intense light exploded behind them. The chaotic red and blue lights of the police lights interweaved together, foretelling the chaotic scene that was to follow. This was not a diversion, nor was it an expansion of the battlefield. It was purely a destruction. It was very likely that it would be an unbridled destruction. Baze. And Qingli believed that he still had a bit of friendship with Baze. He could not help but contact the other side. He wanted to understand just what sort of arrangements Wang had made. He knew that this was meaningless, but if he did not understand this, he would simply suffocate. However, Baze did not respond. When Qingli tried to continue calling out, his scalp tightened. It was as if his consciousness had suddenly fallen into a layer of ice. He could not send out any thoughts. Baze is currently much busier than you. Why don't you do something more meaningful? For example, maintain silence. And Wang's thoughts flowed within the evolution field. He became the master of everything. And Qingli could only shrink into a corner like a decorative pillar. The exchange of thoughts only lasted for a short moment. At this time, the jumping gunfire inside the building was still imprinted in many people's pupils. But then, the trajectory of bullets from other directions tore through the night sky, penetrated the glass curtain wall, and blasted the figure holding the gun into pieces. Even earlier than that, the gunshots from Block B were only echoes. The evolution field faithfully transmitted these changes back, forming an image. Secretary. And Qingli saw the enemy he had just made. In addition, in Building A and Building C, snipers from either the military or the police had instantly killed the gunmen, as well as sniper robots that had infiltrated the building at some point in time. No one could pull the trigger a second time. Those brainwashed gunmen were originally abandoned pawns, so it was normal for them to die. However, the loss of these few lives proved a very bad fact. The government, the military, and the association were working together. Perhaps the military's assault team, or even the Deep Blue Walkers, were already on their way in a place where they couldn't see. And Wang, things have gotten out of hand. And Qingli couldn't help but roar. But at this time, his body suddenly quivered. The rapidly increasing chaos element caused the projection of the scales of truth to lean more and more toward a balanced state. It instantly crossed an important node, causing the power of the holy artifact to begin to be projected toward the three spellcasters. The function of the evolution field had advanced. The thoughts of the three first oblatums converged in a certain sense. And Qingli still did not have any authority, but at least he had become more sensitive. He could sense that the Krite was attempting to absorb even more chaos element on the black plate. That thing was indeed growing. However, there was interference. There seemed to be an invisible sieve under the night sky. Someone was attempting to gather this chaotic region, or at least bestow a unique order upon this region. The image within the evolution field continuously switched, sweeping over all the members of the society. This included the secretary that Enchanting paid special attention to, as well as Luo Nan, who was about to land. Enchanting noticed that the teenager was currently looking up at the sky. His expression of astonishment was extremely obvious. He should have been startled by the intense changes. The problem was that his gaze was not directed at the ceiling of Frost River reality where the Ablatum Knights were soaring. Instead, it was directed at a higher altitude. "It's him. It's that kid." Enchanting blurted out. Actually, he did not know whether or not Luo Nan was the problem. However, the thought of using someone else to do his dirty work was enough for him to express this sort of judgment. And Wang did not respond. Then the image switched, proving that he did not care about Enchanting's judgment at all. The image was focused on the sky above Frost River reality. This enormous triangular spaceship had become a tattered biscuit that had its insides hollowed out due to the collision between Baze and Fairchild. The 7 Ablatum Knights had already leaped away from this place. Their speeds were fast, and they had already collided with the outer glass curtain wall of the building. The ceiling was completely empty. There was nothing there. But soon, the integrated image of information inexplicably shook for a moment. Wondrous ripples even blossomed in the evolution field at that location. It was not an illusion. Enchanting's eyelids twitched. Slight distortions appeared on the magical array constructed from high-energy light beams around his body. Correspondingly, the flow of energy that was originally as smooth as water formed a vortex out of thin air. It was just that the operation of the magical array had nearly entered a fork in the road. While Enchanting was distracted, the image displayed by the evolution field switched once more. It pointed at the first of the Ablatum Knights to charge up the building. Enchanting remembered that this fellow was Flying Shark. His speed underwater and in the air was first-rate among this group of people. The force of his charge was very strong, and his killing intent was extremely heavy. There was a boom as the enormous glass curtain wall was smashed into pieces by Flying Shark. That fellow must have locked onto the direction before he exerted his strength. There were 20 to 30 citizens who did not have the time to evacuate behind this piece of glass. Flying Shark's extraordinary power was poured into every piece of glass shard that flew everywhere. The fate of those unlucky bastards was probably the same as being shot by a shotgun. The first wave. Enchanting could already foresee the scene of blood flowing like a river. However, what appeared in the evolution field next was not flying flesh and blood. It was not miserable wails. It was just streaks of distorted flowing light. Then there was nothingness. Where is he? Enchanting's thoughts froze for a moment. After a moment, the glass curtain wall shattered one after another. The Ablatum Knights landed on the building one after another. However, they were faced with an incomprehensible emptiness. There was not a single shadow within the entire building as far as the eye could see. The crate materialized and the projection of the scales of truth stiffened. Soon after, it melted into the smoke of the plate. The black plate rose up all the way to the top. Correspondingly, the white plate on the other side heavily pressed down. Chapter 238. Luo Nan and the others had just stepped onto the side road of Fudong Main Street when the shockwave enveloped the area around Frost River reality. Just as Zhang Yingying had expected, there were no gunmen on the lower floors. The journey down was easy and pleasant, and it took them less than 100 seconds. They even had the time to think about it a little more. With the shadow of the building, they could quietly descend so as not to be too shocking. However, the actions of the Ablatum Knights above Frost River reality made their cautiousness a joke. Just what is he doing? When Zhang Yingying saw the shockwave that exploded within Frost River reality and the figure that flew out, her usually jumpy train of thought was somewhat unable to hold on. There was nothing strange about a few gunmen dying right after they opened fire and getting rid of them cleanly. Compared to the few Ablatum Knights, they were not even worth a fart. If I had known that this would be the result, I wouldn't have been so hesitant. I would have just taken action. That's for sure, and Wang's brain has already atrophied, hiss. Zhang Yingying suddenly covered her ears and frowned. Half of Luo Nan's brain was stupefied a bit earlier than her. This was probably the most intense tinnitus he had ever felt in his entire life. It rang loudly, making him suspect that someone had fired a gun right next to his ear. He also covered his ears and couldn't help but grimace. What happened? Shuelei was originally immersed in the successful high-altitude rapid descent experience, but he was given a fright by Luo Nan's desperate reaction. Bai Xinyan glanced at the two of them, then lowered her head to look at her wristband. She then shrugged. There's a problem with the encrypted channel. On the screen of her wristband, the countdown stopped at 97 seconds. It's the collapse of the psychic wave network. Zhang Yingying recovered from the initial shock and patted her ear lightly. She had a strange look on her face. I haven't had this symptom for a long time. Is the president doing some extreme experiments again? This is the mission process. Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped talking. At this time, Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward the end of the auxiliary road. Shuelei was a bit hesitant. He raised his head to look with uncertainty. In the end, Luo Nan recovered from his tinnitus state with great difficulty. He blurted out the most crucial words, "Where is he?" In this instant, the brilliant river of stars that Luo Nan used clairvoyance to illuminate was silently extinguished, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. There were only a few dozen stars left, as well as the nebula dust that was even harder to see. Such a strong contrast caused Luo Nan to be stupefied in place. At this time, Zhang Yingying grabbed his arm to make sure that the two of them were a little closer. Then, she looked at Bai Xinyan, and the few of them carefully walked out of the side road. At this time, the night rain had not stopped. The police lights were on, the street lights were on, and the public transport vehicles were also on. Only the buildings behind them were pitch black. The contrast between light and darkness was strong. However, regardless of whether it was in the light or in the dark, there was not a single person within their line of sight. The entire street, the entire building complex, and even the blurry city under the curtain of rain were all empty and devoid of life. If there were strong people, they would be the Ablatum Knights who had just shattered the glass curtain wall. There was also Frost River reality, where Fairchild and Baze had suddenly engaged in a direct and violent confrontation. There was also the first Ablatum and his subordinates within the three dark clouds at the top of the building. These people took the form of constellations, nebula dust, and appeared on the plane of Luo Nan's mental clairvoyance. Compared to the vast and resplendent star river from before, the sparseness was shocking. Oh, I made a mistake. An inexplicable voice penetrated into Luo Nan's mind, and then the background noise suddenly became rich. A ripple seemed to streak past Luo Nan's eyes. He let out a cry, and his entire body seemed to be electrified. His vision blurred, and the dense starlight and the gloomy void transformed back and forth several times. Only then did it stabilize and return to its normal state of the brilliant star river. However, there were some subtle differences. On the plane of reality, a dense mass of people appeared out of thin air. They rubbed shoulders with one another as they hurried past, submerging the small team of 4. Most of the people were far away from this area. They occasionally turned their heads to look at the pitch-black building, revealing expressions of confusion and suspicion. This was the scene that should have happened in reality. But what was that just now? Hey, did you see that? Those Ablatum Knights. They're gone. Zhang Yingying's voice suddenly lowered. It was a bit hoarse. There's also Fairchild and Baze. Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward Frost River reality. There, the impact of the battle had strangely disappeared without a trace. All that was left was the broken outer wall of the building. Luo Nan added in his mind, and the 3 first ablatums on the top of the building. They're on the other side. Bai Xinyan muttered to herself for a few seconds before speaking softly. It's like a legendary technique like spatial fault. They can intercept a segment of space-time and replicate it. Or they can use the projection of the world. I've only heard that there are some extraordinaries who flaunt themselves as gods who possess this sort of nearly inexplicable space-time ability. Spatial fault. Zhang Yingying had heard of this for a long time, but it was mostly in the works of fantasy. She could only spread her hands. Right now, the only known extraordinary in the entire city is the president. Ha! The gazes of the 2 beauties, each with their own characteristics, locked. Zhang Yingying subconsciously reached out to touch her ear. The encrypted channel had yet to be restored, and the chaos of the psychic wave network continued. However, as long as one wanted to understand the situation, one could still use the primitive method of using a wristband. Zhang Yingying began to make calls. She wanted to find someone to clarify things. Fault. Luo Nan, who was next to her, naturally heard the conversation between the 2 women. He blinked, and his consciousness flowed, permeating through the void. The brilliant star river of his clairvoyance was still the same as before. There seemed to be nothing abnormal. However, after the experience he had just experienced, the greatest abnormality was that there was nothing abnormal. Due to the appearance of the spatial fault, the Ablatum Knights, Fairchild, the 3 first Ablatums, and the other members of the Order of Justice were all swallowed up. These people no longer existed on the plane of reality. Regardless of whether or not this was the work of that person, this change should be reflected in Luo Nan's mental senses. It was just like when he first entered the spatial fault and instantly sensed the change. However, the reality was that regardless of whether it was Fairchild's magnificent and dazzling constellation, the nebula dust of Bays and the other 8 Ablatum Knights, or the dark cloud formed by the 3 first Ablatums, all of them remained within the star atlas. There was just an additional layer of indescribable layers. The reason for this was that although Luo Nan's body had come out, his consciousness, or at least a portion of it, remained within the spatial fault. It carried out the work he was most familiar with. Observation. Luo Nan was simultaneously observing 2 worlds. They were independent of each other, yet they overlapped with each other. A brand new dimension was opened within the 3-dimensional structure of clairvoyance. It was a feeling that defied all human experience. It could only be sensed, but it could not be described. It was extremely bizarre, yet brilliant beyond compare. This was especially true when the 2 worlds, which appeared to be completely identical, overlapped with each other in reality. This gave Luo Nan an additional angle of observation. The dark cloud of dust, which was originally chaotic and unclear, became much clearer. Even though it was still difficult to refine a life sketch in the form of a constellation, it was still possible to draw an outline that was not too different from each other. It was more distinguishable from each other. And so, the dark cloud that affected observation gradually thinned and split apart, revealing the true faces of the 3 first Ablatums of the Order of Justice. Soon, Luo Nan found the one with the highest status. It was an old man wearing loose robes. He stood in the middle of the landing platform of Building A. His figure was thin and withered. He looked old and clumsy. Needless to say, this was An Wang. Although he was trapped within the spatial fault, this old man did not show any signs of anxiety. He just smiled and sighed with emotion. Doing things that ordinary people are unable to do is called extraordinary. Oh Yang, compared to you, I really am old and decrepit. An Wang, you praise me too much. As An Wang spoke, a middle-aged man appeared on the rooftop of the building An Wang was in. He wore a black suit that seemed like he was about to attend a banquet. He stood about 10 meters away from the century-old man and bowed slightly to show courtesy. Chapter 239. Ouyang. President Ouyang Qin. Luo Nan finally understood He Yuan's meaning. No wonder she didn't consider the strong members of the order at all. So she was waiting here. He had never truly seen Ouyang Qin before, but he had heard of this division president who taught ability users with the theory of internal logic, invented the hexeer, and established the psychic wave network. Ouyang Qin's name reverberated like thunder in his ears. Now that he saw Ouyang Qin face to face, he felt that Ouyang Qin's image was quite consistent with his expectations. He didn't feel unfamiliar at all. And Wang and Ouyang Qin were even more familiar with each other. They had both been in Xia City for many years, keeping each other in check. The number of interactions between the two was even greater than the number of members and followers they had. This old man, who was already over 100 years old, raised his head to look at the night sky, which was no different from before. He muttered, "The logic world. I remember that you once discussed a similar concept with me. I was asking for guidance." Ouyang Qin was still modest and low-key. But I refused. And Wang reminisced about the past and was rather emotional. Clergy and researchers are the same. They both yearn for the truth, but we won't place holy objects on the experimental table. We will always have a forbidden zone. Reverence or fear. In short, we must avoid it. But researchers are different. You can trample on the holy domain at any time. Ouyang Qin listened quietly, not refuting. But as an extraordinaire, just by standing there, he made everyone on the landing pad, other than Wang, feel uneasy. Actually, when Wang and Ouyang Qin's conversation was transmitted to the other two first ablatums through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao and Enchanting reacted as if they had swallowed a bomb. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and Enchanting groaned. This guy came out of the laboratory. He must have crossed the line. Oh shit. And Wang laughed. Ouyang, my children don't understand you. They don't understand your work. Ouyang Qin's gaze flitted across the complex light diagram around Wang's body. Just like Wang, he raised his head to look at the sky, deep in thought. He did not immediately respond. And Wang quickly withdrew his gaze. He was like an old friend, a senior, analyzing Ouyang Qin's actions. You have never been an inventor. You are a theoretical researcher. You grasp a question, and you will research around it until you form a valuable system. For example, when you set up the psychic wave network, others only saw the convenience, but I knew that you were researching the soul, researching mental energy, and researching the existence of the mental plane relative to the material plane. You wanted to figure out where the power that distorted reality came from. Ouyang Qin looked at the old man's mottled face and replied calmly, "This is what I've been pursuing. According to your church, it is the source of the world's revolution." Oh, yes, the gate of truth is open. The fact that Wang had so easily said the keywords made the two first ablatums' scalps tense. Was it really this old man who had not hesitated to shed all pretense of cordiality with child and push for the strategy of repairing the plank road in the open and crossing the Tsang in the dark? I feel like we are all a joke. On Zheng Zhao's side, Enchanting once again contacted him through a private line. There's definitely something wrong with that old man's brain capacity. Or perhaps, he simply doesn't take us seriously. We should think of a way. Zheng Xiao suddenly could not hear anything. This private line of communication had been inexplicably severed. At the same time, an ice-cold and penetrating intent cut through his nerves within the evolution field, slowly grinding them away. And Qingli's situation would only be worse than his. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and then opened them again. There was no doubt that the old man had always known about this private line of communication between him and Qingli. He just turned a blind eye and let them play around. Perhaps Zheng Xiao should rejoice. Even in private communication, he had never spoken ill of Wang out of caution. But at this moment, he was not only worried that the old man would dig up old debts, but he was also unable to understand why Wang had suddenly expressed his attitude in such a frank manner. What was the meaning behind this? Unbeknownst to him, Jingzhao's attention turned to the core of the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth. The unbalanced state continued, but Jingzhao noticed that the white plate, which had been pressed down to the bottom, had lifted a little at some unknown time. The crite that had materialized on the black plate had also begun to recover its vitality. Then, where was the opposing chaotic element? Jingzhao seemed to understand something in a daze, but the pressure on the mental plane had risen once again. It was ice-cold and heavy, making it impossible for his thoughts to go any deeper. The conversation between Wang and Ouyang Qin was as warm as a spring breeze. No matter what, I can feel your accomplishments. Ouyang, you are attempting to redefine the laws of the material plane. Ouyang Qin shook his head slightly. If such a form truly exists, I hope that it can be reproduced. But up until now, all I have been able to do is create a plausible model, a tiny instance. At the very least, this is a battlefield where I can freely move my hands and feet. It is enough to reduce the impact on the secular world. Look, Fairchild and the others are having fun fighting. While Wang was speaking, Frost River Reality was finally unable to withstand the bombardment of the two powerhouses. The connection between Frost River Reality and Building A broke. A large half of the structure fell down. Fairchild and Baze's figures flew up at nearly the same time, smashing into Building A's body. Immediately, an even more powerful shockwave swept out. The glass walls of over 10 floors above and below were shattered with a loud rumble. Glass flew down like rain, and the entire building seemed to shake. If this was the plane of reality, the casualties of the surrounding citizens would be in the hundreds or thousands. But now, there was not a single person in the building. Even if it was completely demolished, it would not matter. The only thing they had to worry about was the church members on the rooftop. The confrontation between Fairchild and Baze grew more and more intense. Although Wang had taken the initiative to bring it up, his gaze was focused on Ouyang Qin for the majority of the time. He was extremely focused. Wang. It really is a very good design. Wang stared at Ouyang Qin and nodded slightly. You have maintained a very high degree of independence. You are mostly borrowing the existing objects of the material plane. The consumption is not much, and the pressure you endure is not great. It is hard to imagine that this is a flawed product. Ouyang Qin smiled in response. So the possibility of it collapsing due to overload is very small. Wang does not need to think in this direction. Wang could not help but laugh when his thoughts were exposed in a single sentence. Ouyang, since you clearly know that this is an unsuccessful work, why don't you continue researching it? Stay in your laboratory and concentrate on it. Ignore the disturbances of society and let it proceed according to the established method. Wang, I am doing it according to the established method. Chapter 240. The rooftop was silent for a few seconds. Wang began to shake his head. Ouyang. Ouyang. Your current appearance is far from being as convincing as the results of your experiments. Ouyang Qin maintained his gaze. Wang. Other than the teachings of your religion, no one can feel your sincerity. Wang's shriveled mouth opened wide. His surprisingly neat and pure white teeth cracked open into a crack. A low and hoarse laugh came from within. This is nothing. The affairs of the world are not driven by our exchanges. The decisive element is not truth or lies. It lies in the established facts. Ouyang, from the moment you establish the logic world, Xia City will not operate because of our attitudes. Do you want to make a bet? Ouyang Qin seriously considered it for a while. In the end, he sighed silently. I've only cut off the channel to gather chaos elements. I thought that the people at the first level of your order's first oblatums had already abandoned methods such as sacrificial sacrifice. And Wang was still fine when these words were spoken, but the other two first oblatums on the rooftops of the other two skyscrapers looked as if they had been hit in the head with a stick. Sheng Xiao was speechless. He already had a premonition, but he was just suppressing it. Now that he was clear-headed, the impact was much smaller. And Qingli was the one who had truly been hit awake. He cried out involuntarily, "What sacrificial sacrifice?" And Qingli's telepathic thoughts had already cut into the evolution field before his voice faded away. He had never been an idiot. It was just that the consecutive setbacks in a short period of time had caused his mind to not be clear. He received Ouyang Chen's reminder, and looked at the changes in the projection of the scales of truth. The crucial point that he had overlooked before finally appeared clearly. We are in a spatial fault. The two worlds are separated. There are no more panicking citizens. Where does the element of chaos come from? How could he have forgotten such a simple logic? And Qingli's gaze swept over his bewildered subordinates. He then looked at the diagram of light outside his body. Cold sweat poured down in Qingli's body. He wanted to reach out, but he discovered that he was still under An Wang's punitive restraint. He could not even move a finger. But at the same time, the power contained within his body was tightly combined with the diagram of light outside his body. Layer by layer, it was extracted and flowed into the evolution field. Since he was casting a spell, consumption was a must. In addition, Qingli had suffered a backlash earlier, so he felt rather weak. He wasn't too sensitive to the loss of strength in his body. It was also because of this that he did not realize that the amount of power he had extracted recently had already far exceeded what was required for normal spellcasting. Over half of the magic power he had accumulated over the years had unknowingly been extracted. Without a doubt, all of this power had become the weights on the scales of truth to correct that damned unbalanced state. More than half of the power had been lost, but the speed of extraction was still increasing. And Qingli couldn't help but curse, "Old man, you're crazy." As the curses rang out, light and shadow fluctuated between the three buildings. The evolution field went from formless to tangible. It appeared in the void, revealing everything. The rest of the symbols and images were nothing. Everyone's attention was focused on the giant scale in the center. The black and white plates, one above and one below, revealed the crucial imbalance in front of everyone's eyes. It could be seen that even though the current situation was still white below black above, the trend was that the white plate was slowly rising while the black plate was slowly sinking. The difference in weight between the two sides was gradually leveling out. Of course, the price was the loss of power from Qingli, Sheng Xiao, and even An Wang. Why did you choose me? Why did you choose me? And Qingli was unwilling to accept this. The sacrifice of the spellcaster would certainly be shared by all three of them. But the current trend was that he would be the first to fall. Why? It must be known that he was An Wang's grandnephew. He was younger and had a brighter future ahead of him. He couldn't compare to An Wang, but he should at least be a bit stronger than Sheng Xiao, right? Was it because he wasn't a good judge? Was it because he wasn't able to get rid of Luo Nan? As Qingli was struggling with all his might, Sheng Xiao's telepathic thoughts cut through the evolution field. "An Wang, just what kind of substrate did you choose?" And Qingli suddenly shuddered, as if he had just woken up from a dream. Yes, who was the substrate? The substrate that had never appeared on the white plate was the one that determined the upper limit of the element of chaos. If the problem with that substrate was lower than the combined power of the three first oblatums, then Qingli could definitely save it. Just as this thought arose, the image within the evolution field switched. What appeared should be a certain place within the building. That place had just been flattened by the shock waves of the collision. Fairchild wore a white robe that was still spotless. On the other hand, Bays, who was stronger than Fairchild, was like a runaway rhinoceros. His body was flung into the air as he charged at high speed. He smashed through the glass curtain wall and fell toward the bottom of the building. Bays would not die from the fall from this height, but it was destined that it would be very difficult for Bays to tangle with Fairchild for the time being. As for the other Ablatum Knights, without Bays as a shield, charging forward was meaningless. Fairchild raised his head and looked up. The evolution field just happened to give him a close-up. This Ablatum Knight clearly sensed the attention of the evolution field. His gray eyes turned to the side and pointed at the dusky void outside the building. His figure suddenly rose in the next moment. He leaped out of the window, stepped on the building, and flew straight up. It would not take him much time to reach the top of the building. Truth above. Whether it was the furious and panic-stricken Enchanting or the relatively calm Jingxiao, the two first Ablatums nearly suffocated after confirming Enwang's intentions. An uncontrollable despair engulfed their souls. It was Fairchild, the powerhouse who was just below extraordinary. He was the target that Enwang had found. Of the three first Ablatums, the strongest was Enwang. However, he was already old. No matter how powerful his mental cultivation was, his fleshly body could collapse at any time. The remaining two added together might not even be able to compare to Enwang. Purely in terms of blood energy, could Tu and Wen compare to the years of truth? Clearly, they could not. Since that was the case, if they could not gather enough chaos element, the unbalanced state of the scales of truth would truly suck them dry. When that time came, the first one to die would be Enchanting. No, no. Enchanting's mind was restless. His strength was drained even faster. He tried to call out to his subordinates. Seeing his current crazed appearance, there really were a few trusted aides who wanted to rush over to help. But halfway there, Enwang sighed. He extended his hand from his voluminous sleeves and used his thumb and forefinger to form a triangle. His other 6 fingers crisscrossed to form a seal that corresponded to the evolution field. It doesn't matter if you're stupid. What makes you feel helpless is to expose yourself without the slightest scruple. Enchanting's mouth gaped wide open. His eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Just as his eyes were about to tear out, the evolution field's hidden defensive mechanism silently activated. Rays of light crisscrossed over the bodies of several of Enchanting's trusted aides. Dark flames rumbled and ignited. From the outside to the inside, from the inside to the outside, they burned through these people. Yet they could not die quickly. Their hands and feet danced amidst their wretched screams. They fused their terror and despair into the flames. The flames reflected in their companions' eyes and penetrated deep into their hearts. The evolution field clearly displayed this scene. The flames soared, but it was as cold as ice. The priests and knights of the order were frozen on the spot. Enwang did not say it clearly, but the meaning behind his words was very clear. The 3 first Ablatums added together were no match for Fairchild. But if they used an even more intense method and used even more people to burn their offerings, wouldn't that be enough? On the projection of the scales of truth, the plate was still moving at a leisurely pace. The element of chaos continued to accumulate, but should he hope that it would slow down a bit? Or should it speed up a bit? At this moment, Enchanting was truly at a loss as to what to do. He followed the instincts of a first Ablatum and prayed to the order's sacred object. But Enwang was above him like a black cloud covering his head. All he received was an emptiness of despair. Who will save me? As long as I can live, anyone is fine. Enchanting's body stiffened. His consciousness gradually froze. Only a tiny bit of will to live remained amidst the fear and despair. It was like a flickering flame that continued to struggle. The icy darkness slowly descended. The flame slowly sank, growing weaker and weaker. But when the flame squeezed into the depths of his soul and released its final rays of light and heat in despair, it reflected a strange figure that seemed familiar. Chapter 241. And Wang maintained the special triangular hand seal. Dark flames burned within the triangular cavity, spreading to his palms, upper arms, and gradually covering his chest and abdomen, all the way to his head. He did not look like a piece of charcoal. Instead, he used a more economical method to extract the essence energy from his flesh and blood bit by bit. He ignited it to unleash 120% of his energy. And Wang was like this. Sheng Xiao was more or less the same. With Enchanting blocking in front of him, he could maintain his calm for now. But the calmer he was, the more confused he became. For this reason, he used the evolution field to ask Wang, is there a need for this? Aren't we just paving the way for the order to enter Xia City on a large scale? Are we still unable to gain trust at this level? Do we really need to sacrifice the lives of a few first ablatums? And Wang's answer was elusive and hard to fathom. Qingli, this child, only has a clear mind when he is hiding behind someone else. When he spoke of the gate of truth, he asked when and where. This is correct. Only clear concrete information can be considered fundamental. However, the order lacks this right now. So, Wang, you want to verify it. Everything you've done is actually to find this thing that might not even exist. In the end, the order has never verified it, right? Sheng Xiao was unable to continue controlling his emotions. Anyone would find it hard to maintain their calm when they discovered that their life might be squandered on a meaningless conjecture. No, that's not right. No matter what direction it was, he cherished his life. It was just that there were no miracles without a goal. He was not willing to give up even the last bit of hope. And Wing seemed to read his mind. We aren't aimless. Remember the human-faced arachnid. Its source. That corporation that uses money to conceal its strange smell. They want to make medicine out of the human-faced arachnid. What kind of reason is that? Quantum Corporation. The Gate of Truth. Sheng Xiao was speechless for a time. It was hard for him to connect these two elements that did not match. But Wing firmly believed in this point. His will was incomparably firm. We have already lost the initiative. Right now, we must seize this opportunity back without hesitation. Only we have the qualifications to touch the gate of truth. The authority of truth is destined to be held in our hands. Sheng Xiao suddenly understood why he was never able to increase his rank. Perhaps every single one of the 100 people standing at the top of the order was a paranoid lunatic like Wang. He was about to give up communicating, but the unwillingness in his heart made his thoughts throb, Wang. It was also at this moment that the centenarian opposite him used the most efficient method to say to him, pray, child. Pray that the gate of truth. Or, as the Holy Bible says, under the thick clouds, on the island covered in boiling magma, demons carrying chains on their backs pass through the clouds. Order wraps around disorder, and disorder devours order. Perhaps we will find a corner of the clouds, and there will be a powerful demon that the Holy Bible says will cross the sky and take our place. To hell with the demons. To hell with the Holy Scripture. Holy, holy God, gate, holy gate. In holy devil. Holy evolution. Seize. Demon. In. In the creation God. In of it. In. And. In. And Qingli's thoughts were like a fine thread that could snap at any time. It groaned in the storm. He is more stubborn than I expected. That's good. And Wang was very satisfied with his grandnephew's reaction. On the other side, Sheng Xiao felt a chill in his heart. He sensed something and cast his consciousness toward the center of the evolution field. Unknowingly, the two ends of the scales of truth had formed a horizontal line that was relative to the evolution field's triangular region. 3 first ablatums, 8 ablatum knights, and dozens of priests and knights. Their life force was mixed with the heart of fear and the heart of madness. Together, they fused into a huge amount of chaos element. Especially within Qingli's massive output, at least for the moment, it formed a precious balance with Fairchild. Sheng Xiao opened his mouth but nothing came out. His thoughts projected the last bit of information. But we are still in the spatial fault. And Wang's response was like a placebo. Child. You must be clear. This is an opportunity. An excellent opportunity. As the old man's thoughts became clear, Sheng Xiao suddenly felt his body and soul tremble. With the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth and the three first oblatums as the fulcrum, the three-dimensional structure constructed began to tremble and warp. The intertwining effects of power were too complex. It was hard to observe, but the final wave that formed swept across the material plane of the logic world in an instant. At this moment, Sheng Xiao saw Ouyang Qin. This theoretical number one person of Xia City was frowning. He cast his gaze toward the projection of the materialized scales of truth. This scene did not require An Wang to relay it. All he needed to do was to scan through the spread of the wave and transmit the information back to him. Sheng Xiao gathered even more information. For example, he roughly understood the boundary of the logic world. It was the area where the three high-rise buildings were connected. It had a radius of 1 kilometer or so. But here came the problem. If he was sealed inside, how could he talk about verification? Before he could finish his thought, the frequency of the wave led by the scales of truth could be described as such. A subtle change occurred. Correspondingly, the wave cut into the mental plane. According to the ancient records of the order, the mental plane was like a boundless ocean. It was incomparably vast and incomparably deep. A person's mental consciousness was like a fish. Some could only swim in the shallow waters, while others could swim tens of thousands of meters under the sea. Of course, this was just a metaphor. Metaphors were often miles away from reality. But no matter what, it was extremely difficult to enter the deep sea. The cultivation ancient records of the order roughly divided the mental plane into 5 layers: shallow, intermediate, deep, abyssal, and extreme. Sheng Xiao was the clear oath first oblatum. Even when he was in his best state, he could only sway at the edge of the intermediate zone. But now, following the rapid change in the frequency of the wave, his body and soul trembled violently. It was as if he had warped and mixed into an ugly, monstrous fish. With a sudden plunge, he entered the deep sea that he had never experienced before. He also received the feedback of a terrifying pressure. Sheng Xiao groaned. He felt as if the muscles and bones of his entire body were severely deformed. His soul was even more warped beyond recognition. Amidst the extreme pressure and pain, a wealth of information was transmitted back to him. But he did not even have the strength to receive the vast majority of the information, let alone understand it. Perhaps An Wang could. Could he really? Through the evolution field, Sheng Xiao could faintly sense that An Wang was not having a good time either. Every change in the frequency of the wave led by the holy artifact was an absolute torment to the body of the centenarian. The damage caused was irreversible. This was verification. Verification at the cost of one's life. Oh. Sheng Xiao was not sure whether or not he had heard a sound. Chapter 242. In the end, Sheng Xiao's mind was still clear. The relevant concepts quickly became clear in his mind. You released number 3. He originally did not have the strength to converse with An Wang, but seeing this scene, his mind surged and he actually squeezed out a bit of energy. An Wang did not respond. He probably did not have the time because at this moment, there was an explosion. The edge of Building A's rooftop suddenly collapsed. A dazzling light leaped up from below like a miniature sun. Fairchild stepped out from within the rippling waves of light. He walked with large strides toward the burning Wang behind the magic array. 20 meters away, Yang gently shook his head. Even this subtle movement was caught by Child. He turned his face and stared at the extraordinary who had been a spectator for a considerable amount of time with his gray eyes. Child's deep voice seemed to be able to shake the air on the rooftop. Do you still think this is a laboratory? In a sense, yes, Yang calmly admitted. This logic world is my laboratory. How unfortunate. You let someone crazier than you in. Your experiment is bound to be a mess. Fairchild's footsteps did not stop. As he spoke, he crashed into the automatic defensive circle of the evolution field. Gloomy flames burned around his body, but not a single spark could penetrate the white light surrounding his body. Of course, the priests and knights could go forward to stop him, but the people who were immersed in fear and panic could not muster the courage to do so. Fairchild arrived outside the magic array unimpeded. His movements were still crisp and efficient. He extended his hand and shattered the cocoon-shaped diagram of light into fragments that filled the sky. One of the 3 pillars of the evolution field, and it was also the most important one, had been shattered just like that. Correspondingly, the 2 first ablatums on the rooftops of Building B and Building C screamed miserably at the same time, as if they had lost control of high-voltage electricity. The diagram of light around them twisted and collapsed. Sheng Xiao fared slightly better. He had discovered Fairchild rushing to the rooftop in time. He was mentally prepared. Although the backlash was fierce, it was not fatal. However, on the other rooftop, Enchanting, who was already out of his wits, was not so lucky. Forcefully entering the depths of the mental plane was already too much for him to bear. The backlash from the collapse of the pillar of the evolution field destroyed his fleshly body in the first instant. The splattered flesh and blood turned into burning torches before they could completely disperse. The pain of his flesh being torn apart and being burned incinerated Enchanting's willpower into ashes. He knelt on both knees and then collapsed onto the ground. He rolled around and let out anguished howls, each one weaker than the last. Meanwhile, in Block A, the dark flames around Wang expanded by half a meter. The intensity of the flames had multiplied many times over. His robes and his skinny body were all ablaze. The light of the fire penetrated deep into his body. Through the flames, one could even see the emptiness behind him. But Wang only stood there quietly. He maintained the triangular seal that corresponded to the evolution field. He only raised his face slightly. His eyes were still turbid amidst the flames as they met Fairchild's gray pupils. The moment their gazes met, he opened his mouth slightly and spoke in a weak voice from his already scorched throat, "As long as you yearn for the truth, it will definitely be on both sides of the scale. But there is no need to be at the mercy of chaos." Child stepped forward again and punched in Wang's head. The external force of the fist and the internal flames acted at the same time. The old man's head was instantly smashed into fireworks that filled the sky. Child's expression did not change in the slightest when he succeeded in one strike. This was because he knew that the target his fist had shattered did not have much meaning. His fist, which he had yet to withdraw, slightly tightened. An invisible shockwave was launched from the material plane. It charged into the mental plane and penetrated extremely deep. But in the end, he was still a step too slow. Some incorporeal shadow leaped out from Wang's burning body and concealed itself in the depths of the void. Child raised his head and his gaze pointed to the center of the triangle formed by the 3 buildings. It was the void directly above Frost River reality. There, the materialized projection of the scales of truth stood amidst the rolling waves of light. The evolution field had lost its pillar and could completely collapse at any moment. But the projection of the scales of truth still appeared to be stable. This was not just the miraculous effects of the holy object. It was the support of a new power. On the rooftop of Block C, Sheng Xiao could no longer stand. He barely managed to control his body and sat on the ground. He looked down in a daze. Within the distorted and turbulent evolution field, the originally malevolent image became even uglier. Before, he had only seen the occasional insect limb. Now, it appeared before his eyes in a seriously distorted posture. Of course, it was no longer an insect. It was a clear demonic shadow. The slender limbs moved within the waves of light. The demonic body of man and arachnid that was one with one clung to the lower part of the projection of the scales of truth. The six-eyed demon eye flickered with light. No one knew who its attention was focused on. Number 3, Xing Xiao murmured. Number 3 was a human-faced arachnid. The Order of Justice was one of the first powers to clearly set out to search for and utilize the human-faced arachnid. They relied on their first move and accurate information to capture a total of 5 human-faced arachnid clones over the past 10 days. They were arranged according to numbers 1 to 5. After some research and testing, the human-faced arachnid clones devoured each other. There was also a specimen that was sent to the first sacrifice. In the end, only number 3 was left. It was kept at Wang's place. No one knew what the old man would do. Now, Wang's head had been smashed by Fairchild's fist. Number 3, who had remained hidden all this time, had revealed itself. Furthermore, it had thrown itself into the collapsing evolution field a step earlier. Xing Xiao was in a state of confusion. His consciousness, which was still being pulled and controlled by the evolution field, connected with a chaotic and restless power. Human-faced arachnid, number 3. Xing Xiao instinctively wanted to use the method of controlling the human-faced arachnid to secure the initiative. But in the next instant, he came into contact with a cold and clear plane behind the chaotic power. The information in his consciousness rippled like light waves. The frequency was so familiar. At this moment, Xing Xiao's hair stood on end. And Wang. Number 3 did not respond. He could see that its 6 demonic eyes and its ugly head were pointing in a different direction at the same time. It was the rooftop of Building B where Enchanting was. In the next moment, number 3 suddenly disappeared from the plane that could be sensed. By the time Xing Xiao relied on his perception ability, which had yet to be completely withdrawn from the mental plane, to lock onto number 3's position, number 3 had already crashed into the depths of the mental plane. Its target was clear. It covered the rooftop of Building B in an instant. Its sharp limbs pierced downwards. Before the attack could land, another demonic figure soared into the sky from the remains of Enchanting's body, which was about to be completely burned away. It leaped into the void. Xing Xiao saw it clearly. It was another human-faced arachnid. The spoils of war hidden away. A consciousness suddenly came to him. It was extremely clear. Even though Xing Xiao was mentally prepared, he was still so startled that he nearly blurted out, "And Wang." The consciousness flashed. In the depths of the mental plane, the 2 ugly monsters collided together. Victory and defeat were practically decided in an instant. Number 3, or rather, Wang, used its nightmarish calicity to shred half of the spoils of war. Then it bit down forcefully, completely swallowing the food that was half in its mouth. In the end, it chewed off the head of the human-faced arachnid, which was indistinguishable from each other. The 2 ugly heads came together and one swallowed the other. The scene of the human-faced arachnid cannibalism had never been as nauseating as it was now. Chapter 243. Disregarding Wang's actions for the moment, his judgment should be correct. The human-faced arachnid that had appeared on Wang's body was most likely the spoils of war that Wang had hidden from the human-faced arachnid hunting operation. Not only did it not provide any help to Enchanting, but it also turned the tables on him when he was in his most dire straits. The spoils of war had undoubtedly absorbed the nutrients from Wang. But compared to number 3, who had devoured many of its own kind, there was still an essential difference. Number 3 should be able to sense this difference. It wanted to escape with all its heart, but it was still a step too late. Not to mention the fact that the nutrients it had just devoured had been completely poured out, it had become a part of number 3. Zheng Xiao could clearly feel the entire process of the human-faced arachnid's devouring. This was definitely not a good experience. If even he was like this, then what about Wang? Number 3's actions were very much in line with its ugly outer shell and violent instincts. But if Wang was added to the mix, then the meaning would be completely different. From Zheng Xiao's perspective, perhaps Wang could be 10 times more vicious than he was just now, but he would never use such a crude method. He was like a beast with low intelligence. Wang. Child, are you all right? Zheng Xiao was nearly rendered speechless when his own lines were stolen. But the pressing situation forced him to try. Wang, I can't hold on much longer. You don't need to. Zheng Xiao's meaning was that he hoped to separate his thoughts from the depths of the mental plane. He hoped that he would no longer be bound to the evolution field and the human-faced arachnid. But Wang's reply was despairing. Child, you are very important. Very important. The evolution field completely collapsed the moment their thoughts intersected. But Zheng Xiao was unable to retract his projected thoughts. It was like a tenacious kite string. One end was connected to Zheng Xiao, and the other end was pulled by the human-faced arachnid that Wang was residing in. It floated in the endless void. This feeling was not unfamiliar. The Order of Justice had long since grasped the method to control the human-faced arachnid. When they conducted experiments, the first ablatums were the controllers. This feeling was very complicated. It was like a combination of walking a dog and flying a kite. Sometimes, the phenomenon of a soul attachment would occur. It was as if one had transformed into a human-faced arachnid and roamed in the depths of the void. Because of his discovery of this phenomenon, Wang had even specially developed an application. It was a faith product provided to large clients, the source of tonight's chaos, the human-faced arachnid exoskeleton armor. But now, it seemed that there was a deep reason why Wang was so concerned about his little invention. Perhaps he had long since anticipated that there would be a day when he would ride a true human-faced arachnid and dive into the deepest depths of the mental plane. After many days of experimentation, Zheng Xiao was very clear that the depth of the human-faced arachnid's dive on the mental plane far exceeded that of the first ablatums. There were 5 types of depths in the spiritual plane: the shallow zone, the middle zone, the deep zone, as well as the abyss zone and the polar zone. In short, they were known as the 3 zones, 1 zone and 1 zone. Those who were not extraordinaries or those who had specialized in B-class and above would find it very difficult to enter the latter 2 levels. Zheng Xiao's limit was the middle zone, and even within Wang's profound spiritual cultivation, he could only stay in the deep zone. If he wanted to go deeper, he would need the support of a holy artifact and pay a considerable price. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, staying in the deep zone was the most normal thing. It could enter the abyss zone or even the depths of the polar zone at any time. This sort of zone had already been completely cut off from the material plane. It was impossible for any purely physical instrument to detect its existence. In other words, this sort of darksider life form completely followed its instincts in its actions. It had no intelligence to speak of. It would often enter the shallow zone of its own accord because of the temptation of food, and react with the emotions and consciousness of people. This gave people the opportunity to capture it. Yes, as long as the human-faced arachnid interfered with an external object, it would inevitably affect the depth of its concealment. The degree of influence corresponded to the depth of the interference target on the mental plane. The closer the depth of the 2 sides was, the smaller the influence on the human-faced arachnid. Zheng Xiao had a general understanding of Wang's current resolute method of doing things. Perhaps he could reduce the influence of the interference to the minimum. He could use the human-faced arachnid's innate talent to search for the gate of truth hidden in the depths of the boundless void. And Wang had already begun to move. The marvelous probing waves were transformed by the human-faced arachnid to cut into the deeper depths of the mental plane. Zheng Xiao wasn't too clear about the specific process of probing as a kite string, but there was one thing he didn't understand: why did it have to search on the mental plane? Was the gate of truth nothing more than an illusory spirit? Just as he was puzzled, and Wang took the initiative to communicate telepathically with him. It's a pity, child. I can't pass on my current experience to you. You don't understand how interesting this experience is. What I can tell you is this: don't use the popular analogy of the order to speculate on the truth. The structure of the mental plane, the way the mental and the material interferes, is much more interesting than you can imagine. Of course, I also have to thank Ouyang, thank his laboratory. On the rooftop of Building A, Fairchild turned his face and looked at Ouyang Qin, who had just walked to his side. How long are you going to let Wang corrupt your laboratory? Ouyang Qin loosened his bow tie a bit, allowing himself to enter a more relaxed state. At the same time, he became more engrossed. He let out a breath and said softly, "It's true that it's good to reinforce a house when an earthquake is already brewing, but it's impossible to reinforce a city. We need to release a certain amount of energy, and sometimes we even need to detonate it. This is what the laboratory does." Fairchild sneered, "Yuan and Wang must get along very well." "I used to." Ouyang Qin did not deny it. Then he asked in reply, "Mr. Fairchild, are you not going to provide some information? I know nothing about Wang's plans. I'm talking about the human-faced arachnid." The human-faced arachnid. This dark-sider life form is more marvelous than we can imagine. Quantum Corporation is one way of saying it. The Society's research is another. Of course, there's also the Order of Justice. Is there a place for it in the ancient records of the Order? Fairchild sank into deep thought. He needed to recall and weigh the pros and cons. However, the development of the situation did not give him much time. Number 3, who was floating in the depths of the void, had already switched frequencies for the 5th time under Wang's control. This time, there were some subtle changes. And Wang was not sure what Fairchild saw. He projected his thoughts over with incomparable concentration. However, a more substantial change occurred within number 3. It occurred in the depths of the human-faced arachnid's inherent chaos. Hua la la sounds rang out, like the trembling of a chain. There was practically no pattern to the random trembling, but this sound, that could be sensed and distinguished, was itself incompatible with the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. Chapter 244. And Wang never rejected order, but he wanted it to be under his control. Right now, all of his energy was focused on controlling the probing of the outside world. He was unable to completely take care of the interior of the human-faced arachnid. Even if he did, it would be useless. And Wang had once attempted to sort out the chaotic interior of the human-faced arachnid to form a complete model, but he had failed as expected. This was because chaos was the nature of the human-faced arachnid. It could not be changed. Therefore, he needed to use the kite string that was Xing Xiao to resist the primal chaos within the human-faced arachnid's body. He needed to maintain his basic rationality so that he wouldn't be completely suppressed by the human-faced arachnid's instincts. But now, Wang had actually sensed the power of order within the human-faced arachnid's body. He had never doubted the results of his research, so the answer was very clear: an external force had joined the fray. Without a doubt, this power came from the spoils of war. That thing had clearly been shattered by the human-faced arachnid's devouring power, but for some unknown reason, it was pieced back together. Chaos was shattered, and it could only become even more chaotic. The fact that it could be pieced back together meant that its chaos was just a disguise, a brilliant simulation. This reminded Wang of the conviction product he had just developed. The little thing was a reflection of his thoughts. He had wanted to spend some time combing through it and collecting more data, but Child's appearance had ruined his initial plan. From that moment on, the development of the situation became more and more ridiculous, and now, it was completely unrecognizable. Simple recollections were meaningless, but clear content could help people organize their thoughts. Following this clue all the way back, Enwing finally confirmed that his previous judgment had been wrong. That was definitely not some spoils of war. It was a replica. Perhaps it was a product of faith that he had created. As far as he knew, the current owner of that thing had been replaced by a certain young man. From the taste he had just swallowed, that thing was more advanced than his initial version, to the point that it was almost as if it was the real thing. However, Enwang was not surprised. That young man had some kind of unbelievable power of order, and with his special ability, he was able to stop the changes of the unbalanced state time and time again. Ouyang Chen should express his gratitude. Otherwise, he might not have had the time to set up the logic world. However, Enwing also remembered that the young man should have been isolated from the logic world. What a miraculous little fellow. Of course, it was also infuriating. The deviation in the direction of his mind caused Enwang's previous probing efforts on the mental plane to go to waste. He lost that momentary clue that might have led to the gate of truth. However, he did not let emotions like anger take the upper hand. Instead, he directed the probe waves in the opposite direction immediately. Enwing performed a self-examination on the human-faced arachnid, locking onto the elements of order that were incompatible with chaos. He seized the opportunity to push back. Any search and probing would be empty talk if the source of interference wasn't disposed of. The vibrating vibrations of the chains grew clearer and clearer. The corresponding information continued to join and combine, finally forming a dark chain. It twisted and stretched, piercing through the interior of number 3's chaotic shell. It radiated countless strands of barbs that seeped into every part of the human-faced arachnid. The situation was much more troublesome than Enwang had originally judged. The power of order used this form to declare its invasion of the human-faced arachnid. As for the longer part of the chain, it extended into the depths of the mental plane. Without a doubt, the other end must be contacting that boy wonder. He's called Luonan, right? Enwang's thoughts coiled, forming an incorporeal incantation. He had seen Luonan's basic information before. He had used the evolution field to lock onto Luonan's aura. This was enough for a secret-bound first ablatum. A highly lethal secret spell gradually formed. He would fire it without hesitation the instant he locked onto his target. He would forcefully blast through the barrier between the mental and the material plane, eliminating the worry of the rear. This was not the smartest method, but it was the most straightforward. Even if this would cause his parasitic soul within the human-faced arachnid to enter a dangerously weak state. Enwang's mind extended out along the chain. With the assistance of the human-faced arachnid, the sealed and chaotic void structure of the logic world was no longer able to block it. Enwang originally had no intention of using this ability on the plane of reality. But now, the situation had changed. He roughly remembered the last place Luonan appeared before the logic world was erected. He traced the direction of the chain and scanned the plane of reality at the same time. Enwang was confident that he could lock onto his target within 2 seconds. The probing waves smoothly cut out of the logic world. It was hard for Ouyang Chen to control the probing power of the human-faced arachnid. But at this moment, the information that came flooding in from the outside was not the scene of a metropolis. Instead, it was a starry sky that left one in a daze. It was so unfamiliar. Enwang was dazed for only an instant. He soon came to a realization. This was the projection of a certain person's consciousness. He had already made direct contact with Luonan. The kid's combat experience seemed to be lacking. He practically had no anti-detection methods in a confrontation on the mental plane. The two sides instantly clashed. Short. And Wang was just about to blast out the secret spell of death, but he had no choice but to stop. He had never imagined that the scene of a person's consciousness could be this vast and majestic. It was true that the power within was practically non-existent. But this kind of performance in itself was an inconceivable achievement. This was just the reproduction of Luo Nan's perception. He needed to trace back to the origin to find Luo Nan's core consciousness. But behind this starry sky scene were the auras of countless living beings. They appeared here in the form of stars. Together, they formed a vast and hazy structure. Plus, the scene formed from Luo Nan's observation and perception was absolutely not just grand. He made full use of the mental plane, including the reality of the logic world. The starry sky looked flat and uniform as a whole, but it actually contained complex and warped details. It was like a maze. As for Luo Nan's core consciousness, it was hidden behind layers upon layers of curtains. It was hard to discern its location. If Luo Nan had truly used his power to forcefully construct the scene, and Wang could have charged in all directions and relied on feedback to find his target. But in the pure domain of perception, the more one searched, the easier it was to be led by the nose. Also, the environment here was simply like a fragrant soup pot for the human-faced arachnid. Its powerful and terrifying instincts began to stir once more. This diluted Wang's power. And Wang made a prompt decision. He gave up on probing the plane of reality. He didn't want to waste any more time. He still had the chain. The power of the heavily chained crow was increasing. It had a restraining effect on the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. It made number 3 feel uneasy. And Wang simply strengthened number 3's instincts in this aspect. He let number 3 search in reverse along the chain. No matter what, the master of this chain was undoubtedly Luo Nan. Ha! Number 3's probing suddenly came to a halt. This was because at this moment, an absolutely oppressive feeling came whistling from the other end of the chain. The sudden increase in pressure turned the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid into a pot of boiling oil. If the human-faced arachnid possessed consciousness, its boiling instincts would certainly drive it to scream loudly, "Danger! Danger!" A terrifying power of the same origin but different descended with a rumble. Number 3's combat instincts were pushed to their limits. A battle across space erupted in an instant. And Wang's control suddenly fell to its lowest point before the boiling instincts of the human-faced arachnid. He was like a small boat bobbing up and down amidst the roaring lava. He could capsize at any time. The situation was out of his control once more. He suddenly understood. The one at the other end of the chain was absolutely not Luo Nan. It was a damned human-faced arachnid. An extremely powerful one. Chapter 245. The instantaneous spatial perception was quite clear. The distance between the two human-faced arachnids was extremely far. At the very least, it far exceeded the limits of the normal senses between human-faced arachnids. In other words, this was a collision that should not have occurred. Then was this a trap? A trap specifically targeted at the human-faced arachnid, a trap targeted at Wang. Before Wang could understand the root cause of the change in the situation, the clash between the human-faced arachnids had already entered a white-hot state. The hazy starry sky was filled with the powerful pressure of hostility. Number 3's body was forcefully warped. Every movement was an all-out confrontation between tangible and intangible forces. For this reason, the chaotic power within number 3 revolved at a higher speed. It was like a boiler, crushing and incinerating all internal fuel in order to provide an even more powerful internal energy. From Wang's perspective, this was simply a calamity. After he abandoned his fleshly body, his soul was placed within number 3's body, achieving a partial fusion. But in the end, they had not completely fused as one. there was still a considerable portion, the most crucial portion of his intelligence, that remained independent. After boiler number 3 was activated, nearly a tenth of Wang's soul region had evaporated in a few short seconds. Many of his memory materials had been wiped out in an instant, causing him to be slightly dazed. Only when Jing Xiao, who was affected, let out a blood-curdling scream did Wang suddenly wake up. The kite string was about to break. How could the chain still be so sturdy? A self-mocking thought flashed through Wang's mind. He forced himself to forget the imminent threat of death. He poured his own power into the chain in an attempt to control number 3 and break free from it. The heavily chained crow was the only channel to contact the 2 human-faced arachnids. It was also the main battlefield where the 2 human-faced arachnids clashed. If Wang wanted to destroy the clash, breaking the chain was the most effective method. With Wang's help, number 3's power suddenly rose by a level. Her 8 limbs plucked at the void, moving with all her might in an attempt to go against the chain. The heavily chained crow became perfectly straight. The pulling force and the opposing force acted at the same time, causing the shaking of the chain to intensify. The vibrations of the chain connected into one, and finally turned into the sharp, wang sound of a rubber band on the verge of collapse. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. The more intense the clash between the human-faced arachnids, the more terrifying the internal pressure of boiler number 3 became. The domain of Wang's soul continued to be corroded, but he still needed to accelerate the process to ensure the output of number 3's power. This was the stupidest kind of consumption, but in a rush, Wang had no other choice. At this moment, Wang felt that he and the heavily chained crow were like 2 burning sticks of gunpowder. It was a matter of who would burn to the end first, ignite the explosives, and explode. The truth is above. Boz. The prayer and the trembling occurred at the same time. Another wave of collision exploded on the chains. The powerful impact finally broke through the limits of the heavily chained crow, causing it to suddenly lose its special structure and collapse with a hum. 03's body suddenly stopped as the chain was broken. However, Wang was not happy at all. At this moment, the area of his soul had shrunk to 2/3 of its original size. A large amount of memory material had been annihilated. Even with his tenacious will, he appeared to be in a trance for a while. In addition, in the final clash of power, Wang no longer had the strength to protect other areas. Jing Xiao's kite string had also been severed. 03 floated in the hazy starry sky. Starlight filled the sky, but there was no longer any clear trail to guide it. It was as if it had lost its way in the starry sky and had lost its direction. Wang caught his breath and sorted out the area of his soul that had become a mess. He also tried to use this opportunity to increase his control over 03. However, just as his soul area was gradually spreading towards the chaotic area of 03, the internal pressure of the boiler number 3, after a short period of cooling, ignited with a rumble. Wang forcefully endured the pain of being roasted by poisonous fire, ensuring that his heart was clear. However, his mind still sank heavily. 03 slowly turned its body. Its instincts were restless again, and it was even more intense than when it was in the fierce battle earlier. At this moment, Wang heard a kind of fine low-pitched sound. It was like the background noise that existed in a big city at all times. It was faint and undetectable, yet everywhere. If one were to look closely, they would be able to see a lot of messy information. Amidst this faint noise that was hard to ignore, the shadow was like a muddy river that silently flowed past. A huge and ugly body floated out from within. Its limbs were spread out, and its demonic eyes flickered. When it first appeared, it was at the side of 03. When its crooked and bent body completely floated above the shadowy water, it was already in front of 03. Through 03. Wang locked onto his target from number 3's perspective. This human-faced arachnid was clearly a size larger than 03. Its body was more solid as well. The powerful pressure that assaulted its face made it hard for 03 to suppress its restlessness. 03's instincts should lean towards fleeing, but in the end, it chose to stay in this star field. This had nothing to do with courage. The reason for this was the incorporeal power of order. It had been placed into this hazy starry sky, turning it into a strange cage. Even though it was boundlessly vast, the two human-faced arachnids had already locked each other firmly. Only when victory and defeat were decided, when life and death were decided, would this be the final conclusion. It was that mysterious chain. It seemed to have collapsed, but in reality, it had turned from being tangible to incorporeal. It had used an even more inconceivable form to arrange order. It had displayed an inescapable coercive power. Just as Enwing understood this clearly, the human-faced arachnids had already begun fighting again. The human-faced arachnids were not like intelligent life forms. They did not speak nonsense. Under the urge of their instincts, both sides activated their charging mode and collided with each other. Number 3's left commissary were bitten off by the powerful arachnid in just a single exchange. The powerful arachnid swallowed the commissary into its stomach. Number 3's sharp limbs on the same side stabbed into the side of the arachnid's humanoid body. The wound sizzled and burned. Bloody flames soared. The two human-faced arachnids let out soundless roars of pain at the same time. But this kind of direct wrestling mode did not change at all. It was as if they had returned to the ancient Colosseum. They used the most bloody form to please others. Then at this moment, who was the one they were trying to please? Enwing strove to maintain a clear line of thought during the confrontation between the human-faced arachnids. The changes in the chain displayed the exquisite switching of the power of order. This was absolutely not a spontaneous change. At the very least, there was a frame that encompassed this starry sky. Who did the frame belong to? Enwing knew the answer. But in the face of this hazy starry sky, even with his experience and ruthlessness, it was hard for him to come up with a suitable method to lock onto the person behind the scenes. Unless... Number 3's body trembled violently once more. It was at a complete disadvantage in this wrestling. Right now, half of its ugly face had been bitten off by the powerful arachnid. It had lost half of its 6-colored demonic eyes. Its aura was rapidly weakening. There was no chance of victory if this continued. Enwing only used 1/10 of a second to make a final judgment. The corresponding choice did not take up too much time. His mind reflected internally. A gloomy round bead appeared within the area of his soul. The bead was covered densely with strange and bizarre patterns. This was the secret curse of death that he had formed in order to kill Luo Nan as quickly as possible. Right now, Enwing did not hesitate at all. His soul strength crushed over, shattering the secret curse. A fatal negative energy swept through the area of his soul. The pain of his mind was indescribable with words. But he could use a similar method to vent it. His mind surged and he roared loudly on the mental plane. Chapter 246. An invisible wave swept across the starry sky, spreading far and wide. At Enweng's side, he still understood the true meaning of the fluctuations. Expanding another circle, only pure power was exposed, pushing outwards layer by layer. Under the effect of this power, the starlight that filled the sky was like candlelight in a gale, about to be extinguished. In fact, no stars could be destroyed. This hazy starry sky was nothing more than a projection of Luo Nan's perception. It was purely a picture of information. What Enweng was doing now was using the probing waves to sort out the veins within, following the path of the projection and pouring the relevant information back into the material plane. The blessing of the projection of the scales of truth, the information of the deadly secret curse, and the instincts of the human-faced arachnid merged together. Its penetrative power was incomparable. Whether it was the logic world or the scene of Luo Nan's consciousness, none of them were able to isolate it. The probing waves pushed forward layer by layer, and they soon received results. In the material plane, in the metropolis, the flames of life flickered. There was no actual damage, but within the area of influence, there was information that resembled the ravings of hallucinations. It flowed into the tens of thousands of people. The vast majority of the information would be unconsciously filtered out by people. A small portion would form a relatively clear consciousness, but it would be ignored due to the lack of corresponding information. Only a limited few pieces of information would touch upon those with keen senses, who were familiar with Luo Nan, and form an instinctive reaction, forming feedback. Although it was limited, it was enough. "Nanster, is someone calling you?" Shui Lei turned his head in all directions, but couldn't see anything. He was quite puzzled for a moment. Luo Nan went, "Oh," but he didn't respond. He continued to look up at the sky. It was unknown when the autumn rain that had fallen for the middle of the night had stopped. The power supply at Frost River Reality had yet to be restored, and the evacuation of the trapped citizens was nearing its end. The sounds of people gradually grew sparse, making the night seem as dark as ink and the shadows of the buildings dim. The clearing of the outer region was almost complete. The sniper point at Yulon Hotel had just been confirmed to be cleared. The members of the association all went to the street where the Yulon Hotel was located. This was currently the command center for the government and the military, and it was also the most well-informed place. The military ships slowly entered the airspace above, representing the military's full involvement in the incident. The warship was floating above the city. This was a rare sight, and it attracted a large number of people to watch and point at it. Although Luo Nan's gaze was also looking up, it was directed at the area of Frost River Reality. The profoundness of the logic world was reflected in the pitch-black cluster of high-rise buildings, behind the void where the naked eye could not see. Shui Lei didn't receive a response, so he didn't think much of it. He imitated Luo Nan and raised his head to look at the conjoined building complex in the distance. But no matter how he sized it up, he was unable to see anything. He could only scratch his head. The way of the world right now is really evil. With his own strength, he could casually create a space to use. It's no wonder why Hall Master Zhang said that if one isn't able to adapt to the changes in one's cultivation, one would be eliminated as soon as one awakens from it. Their gazes were also directed at the association members. The vast majority of the onlookers were still at a loss over the circumstances of the sudden disappearance of the large group of terrorists. Luo Nan and his group had already obtained a clearer answer. Papercut did his best to widen his eyes and mumbled, "So it turns out President Ouyang is watching." Logic World. The association didn't hear anything about it before. "You've tricked them so badly. I'm just taking advantage of the situation." Red Fox was the only member of the association who made direct contact with Ouyang Qin tonight. He more or less had to bear the responsibility of explaining. He shot a glance at Luo Nan and sneered, "If you want to set rules for others, how can you do it without bringing out the momentum of a thunderbolt? The logic world is erected with full explosive power. I really want to see the faces of those orders." As he spoke, Red Fox's gaze stopped on Luo Nan's face. Even with Ouyang Chen's judgment of being ignorant and the repeated verification of reality, Red Fox could not help but want to test the young man's introverted and immature performance after true contact. "Do you see anything?" Luo Nan raised his head to look at the sky, not reacting at all. Shui Lei coughed to remind Red Fox, but he didn't receive a response. He could only reach out and poke Red Fox. It was as if Luo Nan had just woken up from a dream. He turned his head to scan his surroundings. He Yueyin was the society's full representative right now. She was communicating with the government and the military. She was so busy that not even her shadow could be seen. Bamboo Pole had followed her as a technical member. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan had gone to the military security vehicle. It was unknown what they were up to. Cat Eyes said that she was very tired and went to find a place to daydream. Only Shuelei remained by his side. Red Fox's gaze pointed at Luonan. It was hard to avoid awkwardness when Luonan and Red Fox met each other after such an intense conflict had occurred. Luonan had no experience in dispelling this. Shuelei could not help either. Luonan could only blink. What did you say? Red Fox did not get angry. He just pointed in the direction of Frost River reality. You are proficient in mental senses. You can see things more clearly than us. What's going on over there? Can you tell me? You're not looking. No, I saw a bit earlier. Luonan was quite used to this sort of matter-of-fact attitude. He thought for a moment and said, it's a precise structure that interferes with the mental plane and the material plane. It's like the shield of truth, but it's very different. It really isn't the same. Red Fox was a bit unable to continue facing Luonan's bewildering logic. He could only laugh dryly. Most of the manifestations of extraordinary powers are like this. He gave Luonan face this time. He did not let Luonan blurt out the word nonsense. Luonan was speechless for a time. He was not stumped by Red Fox's question. It was just that the results of clairvoyance were far too complicated to describe with words. Plus, the results of his clairvoyance were a sort of correction to his previous understanding. From Luonan's previous understanding, the mental plane was a sort of deep multi-layered structure. It was like countless curtains stacked together. The layers were distinct. The closer one was to the material plane, the thicker the curtains were. And the lowest part was connected to the material plane. They interfered with each other. The degree of interference depended on the magnitude of the applied force. Therefore, interference between the mental and material planes occurred on everyone. It was just that the interference of ordinary people was negligible. It could be ignored. The interference of ability users was much more obvious. The Shield of Truth was the most powerful and clearest interference method that Luonan had ever seen. It was what he believed to be the benchmark of interference between the mental and material planes. As for Rui Wen, her soul and fleshly body were as one. It was a different situation. It was incomparable. However, the interference of the logic world shattered Luonan's understanding that he had just formed not too long ago. Under the senses of his clairvoyance, the multi-layered curtains of the mental plane rolled down together. They no longer possessed the sense of layers. Instead, they overlapped and warped, even tearing apart. Some of them were originally quite a distance away from the material plane, but they forcefully converged together. Because of this, the lower layers of curtains even had an interference effect, twisting into a ball. This was the third state of the relationship between the mental and material planes that Luonan had seen. It was also the most complicated one. Chapter 247. Through a complicated method of interference between the spiritual and material planes, Ouyang Chen achieved the peeling off of the material plane's surface layer. Virtual and real interacted with each other, constructing a spatial fault that resembled the real world. The rules and regulations inside were no easier than building a skyscraper. Delving into the details would only exhaust one's mind, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Luonan was just looking at the general situation. He didn't continue to get tangled up. Far too much information was involved in explaining these things to Red Fox. A good portion of it was Luonan's personal comprehension. Right now, he lacked confidence in his ability to express himself with words. It was difficult for him to speak for a time. Just as he was pondering how to respond, the sound of a car came from behind him. Luonan was just about to turn his head to check when his neck tightened. Someone had already grabbed him by the back of his collar and forcefully dragged him over. His back smashed against the lower edge of the car. "Stop talking nonsense and get in the car." Zhang Yingying popped her head out of the carriage and urged impatiently. The vehicle she had transferred over should be a military security vehicle. It was rather large, and the rear compartment was enclosed. It would not be a problem for it to carry dozens of people. What's so urgent? Luo Nan thought that there was another mission, so he didn't bicker with Zhang Yingying. He nodded toward Red Fox and boarded the carriage first. Behind him, Shuelei, the Red Fox, and the others also came up one after another. However, very soon, everyone was a little confused. The situation inside was a little different from what they had imagined. The space was relatively narrow, and it was densely packed with all kinds of equipment. It seemed a little crowded after a few people came in. Go to the hospital. Bai Xinyan had just taken off her trench coat and changed into a white doctor's coat. She even put on sterile gloves. She looked like she was about to go all out. Luo Nan was stupefied for a moment. Zhang Yingying, who was next to him, simply took off his clothes. She pulled off his outer cover and lifted his underwear. Wow! Shuelei sighed. There were so many people in the car. Luo Nan's face heated up. Hey! Zhang Yingying didn't care about this at all. Her fingers dug into Luo Nan's undergarments, and she even impudently stroked the lines of muscles on his back and waist. You might be an F-rank disabled candidate, but you actually aren't particularly skinny and weak. Her soft and smooth fingertips streaked across. The sensation was warm, but it caused Luo Nan to quiver and shiver. He even forgot to speak the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Judging from his body fat percentage, his physique isn't any worse than his peers. However, compared to soul energy, it's nothing. Don't move. Bai Xinyan shouted at Luo Nan to stop the writhing and struggling Luo Nan. She connected the wires of the apparatus to various parts of Luo Nan's body. In this way, Luo Nan was embarrassed to move even if he wanted to. He could only obediently allow Zhang Yingying to completely remove his clothes. He asked helplessly, "What exactly do you want?" Acting cool is fun for a moment, but in the blink of an eye, it's the crematorium. "I'm here to bring down your fever." Zhang Yingying temporarily took on the role of nurse. She felt that it was very interesting. She used her finger to poke and poke at Luo Nan's body. She played quite happily. Bai Xinyan saw that Luo Nan's body temperature was rising. She didn't allow Zhang Yingying to tease him any further. She began to adjust the apparatus and explained, "No one knows when the effects of the shield of truth will disappear. And right now, the amplification of your soul strength is quite dangerous. One mistake and the two sides will collide. You won't even have the chance to save yourself. So, you need to be under observation for 24 hours. No matter how good the equipment here is, it's still better to be at the hospital." Luo Nan laughed bitterly. "It can't be that serious, right? Just prepare for the worst." Bai Xinyan's tone was light, but in her heart, she was already certain that the trouble that awaited them would not be small. This could be seen from the fate of the first two generations of the Luo family. Moreover, the problem of the imbalance of body and soul was not the only problem. Red Fox's brows furrowed before Papercut's voice fell. He subconsciously extended his hand and pressed his ear. His gaze flickered toward Luo Nan. Shuelei, who was at the side, saw his actions and exclaimed, "Did you hear it too?" Red Fox indicated for him to be quiet, then he made a few gestures toward Papercut. After the logic world was established, the psychic wave network entered a state of paralysis. It had yet to recover, and the secret communication between them was far less convenient than before. Fortunately, Papercut could understand. He quickly nodded, closed his eyes, and sensed for a moment. Then his expression turned grave. "The spirit summoning technique?" "Yeah, the spirit summoning technique." Bai Xinyan sighed, which was rare for her. I don't know what trouble your boss Luo has stirred up. And Wang is clearly trapped in the logic world. His situation is terrible, but Wang still tries to use this method to lock onto Wang's position regardless of the cost. Plus, he's almost succeeded. The gazes of everyone in the car turned toward Luo Nan. Luo Nan had nothing to say. He could only wear the apparatus and wires on his body. He acted like a puppet, allowing others to do as they pleased. The door to the car opened again at this time. Cat Eyes, who had gone into a daze just now, boarded the car. Bai Xinyan said, Sister Nun and Bamboo Pole will move together with the military. Now that everyone on our side is here, there's no need to delay. No matter who we're facing, it's always best to distance ourselves. The car suddenly increased in speed as they spoke. Soon, they left the conjoined building complex behind. The group of people was basically retreating from the battlefield. 2 minutes passed, and the group exchanged glances. The range of the spirit's summoning technique should be out of range by now. The group of people let out sighs of relief. They no longer needed to pay attention to the intermittent shouts in their ears. Right now, the straight-line distance between the security car and Frost River reality was over 10 kilometers. Even the secret-bound First Ablatum would find it hard to reach, let alone Wang, who was separated by a layer of the logic world. However, Luo Nan was not particularly optimistic. He did not have any hopes that Wang would be able to remove the pressure from Wang just by moving the car. For the current Wang and even for Luo Nan, distance was not something that held much significance. The intertwining of the many layers of curtains of the logic world caused distortions to appear in the distance on the mental plane. In a situation where the distance on the material plane remained the same, a misalignment appeared between 2 points on the mental plane. It was like the overused example of spatial folding. Space was like a piece of paper. The two ends were far apart, but when the paper was folded, the originally long distance would become within reach. Luo Nan did not merely observe this special structural pattern. In fact, Luo Nan immediately discovered a flaw and opportunity after Wang ordered the human-faced arachnid to swallow the high imitation within Qingli's body. Through the heavily chained crow, Luo Nan used the Wraith sign, which was located far away in a secret location of the Blood Flame Order, to establish a connection with the Order of Justice's human-faced arachnid. Luo Nan used the characteristics of the logic world to take advantage of the situation to construct a colosseum, or perhaps an altar. Luo Nan used the format pyramid as a foundation to erect the framework of the altar. This was something Luo Nan was already familiar with. It did not take any effort at all. The only difference this time was the span. What Luo Nan could use, and Wang could use as well. The existence of the logic world had severely distorted the mental plane, but it could not stop Wang's evil thoughts. When the evil thoughts attacked, strangely enough, the projection of the scales of truth floated in Luo Nan's mind, especially the pair of black and white plates floating up and down. A familiar whisper seeped into Luo Nan's mind. As long as one yearns for the truth, there will certainly be two sides of the scales. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Chapter 248. Luo Nan's senses were extremely subtle. In the past, when he erected the framework of the altar, he could always transcend the world and not be directly affected by the sacrificer, only receiving the relevant benefits, as long as he could bear it. But now, Wang's evil thoughts had attacked and the projection of the scales of truth had inexplicably entered. That feeling of being high and mighty had been offended. The frame of the sacrificial altar he had propped up had also been eroded and collided with by external forces. This had never happened before. In the order of justice, the scales of truth were a supreme holy relic. It was equivalent to a sacrificial tool and could be considered a framework for the altar. Wang had already been placed on the scales of truth, which meant that he was the sacrificial object of the scales of truth. One object could be used for two purposes. Their goals were different, and their natures were different. Conflict was inevitable. And what Wang was doing right now wasn't just letting the two frames collide together. And Wang's malicious intent had locked onto his target. He clearly wanted to pull Luo Nan into the depths of the maelstrom. It seemed like he had succeeded. Luo Nan tried to expel the projection of the scales of truth from his mind, but it was useless. This toy grew clearer and clearer, especially on the side of the white plate. It seemed to possess a soul-stealing power that pulled at his mind. It was unavoidable. Upon closer inspection, it seemed to be related to the structural model of the shield of truth. As a result, his body was somewhat tightened, as if he had been tied up by invisible strings. Luo Nan struggled a bit uncomfortably, but he never thought that the equipment outside his body would immediately sound an alarm. The gazes of everyone in the car suddenly converged on him. Zhang Yingying, the temporary nurse, immediately raised her hand high. I didn't do anything. Even if you want to do it, you can't. Bai Xinyan was using the AR image to integrate the data from the instrument. All kinds of graphics and data were arranged in different levels. Those who were not experts would feel their eyelids twitch. However, at this time, everyone could see that in the left region, on a nearly flat wavy line, there was a series of subtle fluctuations. The strength of my body has changed, although the change is very small. Bai Xinyan's gaze turned and swept past Luo Nan's face. The shield of truth hasn't cracked, right? I'm not too sure about that. Luo Nan reached out to scratch his cheeks. He was a bit embarrassed. Although this matter was confidential and couldn't be discussed in detail, he didn't pretend to be a hero. Instead, he showed an uncertain attitude. Bai Xinyan raised his eyebrows slightly, but before he could say anything, Zhang Yingying had already slapped his shoulder again. You don't know. What do you mean by unclear? It's not my problem. In fact, it was. Having fallen to this point, Luo Nan had to admit that he had gone too far. Right now, Luo Nan could already sense the existence of a powerful source of heat beside him. That familiar sense of order was undoubtedly Fairchild's. Luo Nan combined the situation within the logic world with the memory fragments of Enchanting that were gathered from the high imitation. Luo Nan made a judgment that made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Perhaps, like Child, he had been killed first by Wang and sent to the scales of truth to be used as a counterweight. Would he also be placed on the altar and become a sacrifice one day? How ironic. The transcendental feeling of constructing the framework of the altar had caused Luo Nan to lose his accurate judgment. Even if Wang had swallowed the bait himself and bumped into him, the Wraith Sign's level still had the advantage. His eagerness to hunt attitude was too frivolous. After the predicament of near collapse, Wang immediately used a ruthless and decisive response to give Luo Nan a good lesson. If Luo Nan's guess was correct, Wang should have seized the moment when Fairchild blessed him with the shield of truth. He used the secret technique of the order, which Luo Nan did not understand, to succeed in one fell swoop. And things would not end here. Right now, Luo Nan seemed to have replaced characters like Fairchild and Ouyang Qin. He had become Wang's #1 target. Even Luo Nan himself was intoxicated by Wang's ability to draw hatred. Naturally, the most urgent task was to get the situation back on track. Whether it was President Ouyang or Fairchild, had those two been idle for too long? Maybe Wang was exerting his strength against Fairchild, and he ended up bringing disaster to the fish in the moat. Everyone could see that Fairchild had blessed Luo Nan. Papercut furrowed his brows and guessed. He was immediately on the right path. Red Fox spoke in a deep voice, or it could be a direct target. It's like hitting a cow across a mountain. Zhang Yingying reached out to point at Red Fox. She was in great agreement. That's right. Then let's take defensive measures first. Right now, there are no conditions. Bai Xinyan shook her head. She raised her wristband to make contact with the outside world. Soon, she connected. Sister, your boss has the ability to stir up trouble. Even a layer of the world can't stop him. I suggest that you urge President Ouyang to end this battle quickly. Luo Nan's head hung down. He really did not have the face to see anyone for a time. However, he would not be distracted by the mundane plane for too long. He could not completely rely on others to help him. His mind quickly focused back on the altar frame. He could not relax for even a moment on Enwang's side, even if Enwang was weakening at a visible speed. There's not much time left. Enwang was very clear about his own state. In the beast fighting arena, half of Number 3's limbs had been devoured by the bite. Number 3's expression was dispirited, and she had no strength to fight back. Enwang's soul region trembled and shrank. Only half of its peak remained. The rest was torn apart and diverted by the two vortexes. The beast fighting arena was secondary. The projection of the scales of truth was the main target. Since Luo Nan was placed on the scales of truth, he could only be on the side of truth. Enwang had to keep up with the scales of truth, but Luo Nan's weight was absolutely extraordinary. He and Fairchild merged together, causing the projection of the scales of truth to slide into an unbalanced state in an instant. Enwang's mind grew colder and calmer the more dangerous it was in this moment of crisis. It was like the projection of the scales of truth. It was clearly illusory, but it possessed the dignity of a holy object. It possessed the root of immortality. For a short period of time, Enwang could withstand this method of burning his soul. He could even obtain an even stronger tension and achieve an even better result. Bang! It was as if a bowstring had been plucked with force. A probing wave swept across the deep space in the instant the sound rang out. It was more tyrannical and penetrating than any previous wave. In this instant, the logic world and the hazy starry sky were practically transparent to Enwang. His consciousness spread to every nook and cranny of the void, to every level. Accompanying the transparency was a layer of fog that floated up. This was the phenomenon formed when the probing wave touched the material plane and interfered with each other. Too much of this mist had probably accumulated. Soon, the night sky of the logic world became a bit turbid. Bang! Another rumbling sound rang out, and the visibility of the logic world dropped by another chunk. It was as if a great fog had descended. The three skyscrapers seemed to be warping in the curtain of night. Ouyang, Fairchild and the projection of the scales of truth still had some telepathic connection. He could also indirectly touch upon Enwang's state. An ominous omen arose for a time, and he warned Ouyang Qin. Before Ouyang Qin could respond, a bolt of lightning and fire suddenly leaped out from the upper layers of the hazy mist. The glaring forked trajectory was like a heavenly tree that had been cut down. It smashed down. Why was it smashed? Chapter 249. The moment the giant arm smashed down, the seemingly real night sky of the logic world seemed to collapse. Space warped and shook, transforming into fine waves that could be clearly felt. The waves spread across everyone's skin, causing a majority of them to shiver. A corresponding chill emerged from the bottom of their hearts when the projection of the scales of truth at the center of the three buildings suddenly distorted. Its light dimmed and the shadow of the giant arm swallowed it. The illusory projection was clearly unable to obstruct it. The shadow of the giant arm wrapped in lightning rushed down and struck the ceiling of Frost River reality. Even now, there was no visible pause. There was not even a particularly strong impact. It was simply like a corrosive acid that penetrated from the ceiling to the bottom. In the blink of an eye, a penetrating wound over 30 meters in diameter was torn open. Then, ripples of vibration spread from the crack in all directions. Frost River reality completely collapsed and collapsed. It was only at this moment that a terrifying sonic boom rang out. The glass walls of the 3 skyscrapers, regardless of whether they were facing Frost River reality or not, were blasted to pieces. The lightning and fire surrounding the giant arm flowed and sputtered. The exploding beams of lightning were like countless living snakes. They leaped into the 3 surrounding Great Xia buildings and wantonly flew about. Baze, who had just been knocked to the ground floor by Fairchild, just happened to climb to the bottom of Frost River reality. He watched as Frost River reality collapsed and the lightning and fire closed in. Without a word, he crashed into the inner layers of the building. He rolled and dodged, but in the end, he was not stuck. Baze's reaction was fast and his luck was pretty good. However, others might not be like him. There was an Ablatum Knight who was in the direction of Frost River reality. Misfortune befell him. The chaotic lightning and fire just so happened to surround him. He could not avoid it. When the lightning touched his body, he wanted to use his painstakingly cultivated extraordinary strength to resist. However, in an instant, his sturdy torso was affected by an unimaginable force. His limbs were greatly distorted. It was as if a pair of demonic hands were kneading him like a meatball. He was kneaded into a badly mangled ball of flesh and blood as he tumbled about in the destroyed building. The most terrifying thing was that this person did not die quickly. Muffled screams burst forth from the ball of flesh. They were bitter and desperate. Even a powerhouse like Baze's face turned black when he saw this scene. He did not look back as he crashed into the depths of the building. He wanted to get as far away from the lightning as possible. That's not lightning, at least not the pure kind. Luo Nan could roughly see that the source of this wave of electricity was the same as the mist created by Anweng's probing waves. It originated from the intense interference between the mental and material planes. There was no pattern to this kind of interference. It was chaotic and violent. Coupled with the powerful ionization effect of lightning, this was the final result. But then again, this scattering of electric light covered a diameter of nearly a kilometer. How powerful was the corresponding soul power that acted on the physical plane? Using himself as a standard, he was stronger than 10,000 times. Or 100 million times. That wasn't realistic. Even the unfathomable President Ouyang Qin gave Luo Nan the feeling that he was far from this level. There should be some special way of using him. Luo Nan's attention was unavoidably drawn to it. However, that area was destined to not be a good target for observation. The terrifying power in the shadow was not only destructive to the material plane, but also to the mental plane. If it was just a little bit late, it would be like the magma of a volcano eruption, pouring down on Yang Ling's head and face. Luo Nan's pure observation mode was effective. He did not receive a direct attack. But the human-faced arachnid that was fighting to death in the astral coliseum was not so lucky. It let out a miserable hiss at the same time, and its body actually burst into flames at the same time. According to the information transmitted by the Wraith sign, the scorching attack of the giant shadow arm and the chaotic core of the human-faced arachnid were simply like the relationship between a torch and boiling oil. There was still a distance before the human-faced arachnid was ignited. As for the other human-faced arachnid, number 3, she had already been burned through. A portion of her remains had been burned into a steaming mist of energy, which was absorbed and consumed by the endlessly expanding shadow. The Wraith sign, who was entangled above the altar, had a sense of number 3's state. The instantaneous change refreshed the information of its senses, making it even clearer. Behind this terrifying shadow, there was something more real. Perhaps it was a powerful and hungry demon. This thing had yet to truly enter the logic world, but its powerful strength had already displayed its vicious and ruthless characteristics clearly before everyone's eyes. The curtain on the mental plane was swaying and fluctuating, twisting and twisting. This made it even more difficult for Luo Nan to clearly distinguish the true level and position of the demon. He could only make a scenario guess. This demon was like a gluttonous old cat. It stood on the shore, extending its claws to stir the water, hoping to catch delicious fish and eat its fill. Who was it that attracted this old cat? It was undoubtedly the unfathomable Wang, who was currently burning within number 3. Oh, judging from the wraith sign senses, that person's mood seemed to be quite good. It was just as Luo Nan knew. Right now, Wang's soul was ceaselessly withering within the flames ignited by number 3. However, Wang was in a cheerful mood. He wantonly released his emotions under the encirclement of the flames. If his fleshly body was still present, it would be the same as laughing aloud. He should be laughing. Wang was over 60 years old, and he had waited until the era where the heavens and earth were changed. He had been a member of the Order of Justice for 40 years, and he was a firm believer. Unfortunately, he was encumbered by age and his body. No matter how clear his ideals were, the slightest difference was 1,000 miles. He was always blocked from a higher plane, and he no longer had the chance to struggle. But now, as the logic world trembled under the enormous shadow fist of the demon, a crack finally appeared in the incorporeal barrier that had always blocked his head. Looking ahead, perhaps his chances were still slim, but there was still a chance, and it wasn't too far away. The shadow swallowed up a portion of the starry sky. Luo Nan's perception was unable to form an effective analysis of it. For Wang, this was the best road sign. He no longer needed to distinguish the direction. He drove number 3, which was almost completely burned out, away from the battlefield, and he leaped into the shadow. The wraith sign did not pursue Wang under the threat of being completely ignited at any moment. Plus, the altar's frame had turned into a pot of porridge from all sorts of disturbances. It was impossible to stop Wang. As for the demon behind the shadow, it happily accepted the food that directly entered its mouth. But this was not enough. The demon's appetite was clearly extremely good. It didn't discover any fatal threat after its attack in the air, so the congealed shadow began to spread. It entered into casting net mode, and its target was pointed at others. Everyone. Everyone in the logic world had become its target. It was guided by chaotic desires. It would chase after whatever was the most delicious. If everything was delicious, then it would want them all. Before the mist of the probing wave that interfered with the material plane could dissipate, the shadow of darkness flooded in, turning it into surging black clouds that pressed down on the logic world. Chapter 250. Child's body glowed with a mercury-like radiance. It collided with the dark clouds and turbid mist that surged toward him. The two forces collided. Nothing had happened at first, but at this moment, the giant shadow arm smashed Frost River reality with unexhausted momentum. It slammed into the ground. At that moment, the shockwave swept across, and the 300-story buildings could be seen shaking at a visible degree. The transverse and longitudinal waves were tangent. The change in strength became even more intense. The rooftop of the building beneath Child's feet was like a torn rag. Long scars spread rapidly and branched out in all directions. It looked like it was about to fall apart. Child experienced the difference in strength. He knew he was no match, but he was expressionless. He only cast his gaze at Ouyang Qin. "You've been watching for so long just for this. But it's not enough." Ouyang Qin looked up. The source of the danger hidden behind the scenes had finally revealed itself. Right now, the giant shadow arm had formed a pitch-black pillar that pierced through the heavens and the earth. It was like a rail elevator that led to outer space. Its end was on the ground, but it was still difficult to determine where the front end was. Dark clouds and turbid mist swirled around the pillar, forming a twisted vortex. There were also layers of cloud chi that surged and surged. Lightning flashed within the vortex, revealing a terrifying might. The following changes in the situation could no longer be resolved by watching. Ouyang Qin began to exert his strength. There was nothing special about him. Only the materialized ripples swept out from his body. They were invincible. The dark clouds and turbid mist around the giant shadow pillar split apart. The impact of the ripples made contact with the shadow itself, causing it to tremble endlessly. The demon behind the shadow seemed to feel threatened. Suddenly, a cluster of lightning and fire leaped out of the dark clouds and turbid mist and exploded on top of Ouyang Chen's head. Ouyang Chen did not dodge. He simply opened his mouth and inhaled, swallowing the lightning into his stomach. His expression did not change. Light crackled and pulsed around his body, but it was smoothed out by the ripples. Ouyang Chen dealt with it rather easily after exchanging blows. But then he frowned. It's filled with the scent of greed and restlessness. Child asked, "Is it an extraordinary?" It does not possess extraordinary thought. It is pure chaos and chaos. It's more like a human-faced arachnid. Ouyang Chen's line of sight swept past the giant shadow pillar and the swirling clouds. He sighed. However, it turns out that there is also the existence of a domain in the midst of extreme chaos. From this point of view, it wouldn't be wrong to say that it's an extraordinary. The so-called giant shadow pillar was an area where the spiritual and material planes interfered with each other. The dark clouds and turbid fog at the periphery were the same, but the degree of interference was much lower. As for the periphery, it was of the same level. Given that demon's abilities, it was entirely possible for him to cover the entire logic world with his power. However, its outstanding instincts allowed it to divide itself into different levels. It used the most powerful interference to distort a portion of the physical space, and then used this as a weapon to create an intense conflict with the outside world. It was like a lever, using a small amount of energy to pry out power that far exceeded the limit. The dark clouds and turbid fog, the leaping lightning and fire, all of it came like this. This kind of high-level technique was the effect of an extraordinary's domain. Ouyang Chen did not dwell too much on this point. Chaotic enemies, even if they possessed the abilities of extraordinaries, were not worth paying too much attention to. Chaos, itself had no logic to speak of. Even if they could analyze something, it would only be superficial and could only be used to fool amateurs. Even if he wanted to study it, he had to find the overall mechanism that formed this chaotic power. His target was Wang, and he had no intention of changing it at the last minute. Ouyang Chen's figure rose slightly, the tips of his feet a few inches off the ground. Without any support, he floated in the air. At the level of extraordinaries, even if they did not have the innate ability to fly, they could still create an environment for flight through the mutual interference between the spiritual and material planes. This was also one of the uses of a domain. Wherever Ouyang Chen went, whether it was the clouds or the lightning, they were all eliminated by the substantial ripples. It looked like he was unimpeded. And at the front of the spreading ripples, it gradually became clear, like a ray of light. The giant shadow pillar, which had originally been a single entity, was now faintly transparent. The front of the ripples, which had always been very orderly, also began to distort. The demon and Ouyang Chen's domain had collided. The air in the logic world suddenly tightened, and the entire area shook. The rooftop of Building A, which had been on the verge of collapse from the confrontation between Child and the dark clouds and turbid fog, had now collapsed. The priests and knights, who were at a loss, all fell down miserably. Child did not have the ability to float in the air, so his figure could not avoid falling down. He fell down from the gray, turbid fog and smoke. He exhaled and a mercury-like radiance forcefully cleared the surrounding area. He raised his head to look up. However, he was not looking at Ouyang Chen, nor was he looking at the demon that had yet to reveal itself. What he saw was clearly a human-faced arachnid struggling endlessly in the shadows. The collision of the domain caused the Darksider life form, which had been submerged within the giant shadow pillar, to reveal itself. Number 3. This human-faced arachnid had just escaped into the depths of the mental plane. When it probed the deep sea, it was still strange and inexplicable. It was hard to track it down. But now that it had reappeared, its demonic body was incomplete, and its demeanor was dispirited and listless. Its entire body was ignited with flames. Most importantly, it had lost its special ability to wander in the depths of the mental plane. Was it because of the impact of the giant shadow pillar, or was it because of some other reason? Child could see that although number 3 was struggling in the shadows, it did not look like it was trying to escape. Instead, it was continuing to break into the inner layer. He could not help but suspect that the one inside was still in Wang. Doing something like this in the depths of the shadow dark domain ruled by the demons was simply suicide. Ouyang Qin, who was in the air, could see things a bit more clearly than Child. The Enwang he knew was not a simple and crude character. Even if Enwang acted on impulse, there would certainly be a basic reason. The conflict between the domains grew even more intense. Ouyang Qin used this opportunity to see through the layers of shadows. He could faintly see a glimmer of light shining within the giant shadow pillar. He had found the reason. Ouyang Qin quickly determined that the so-called glimmer was the projection of the scales of truth. It had not collapsed from the initial impact. Instead, it had embedded itself into the depths of the shadows. Moreover, its form was the same as before. Of course, there were still some changes. The kite that controlled the chaos element on the black plate was currently curled up into a ball. It was on the verge of death. The mist formed by the chaos element had completely melted into the surrounding shadows. It looked like the kite would be its turn at any moment. Under Ouyang Chen's attentive gaze, the human-faced arachnid number 3 was doing its utmost to shorten the distance between it and the projection of the scales of truth and the kite. The arachnid did not cower in the slightest, even though there was a terrifying high temperature and corrosiveness within the shadows that were constantly digesting it. Chapter 251. The kite entered its abdomen and number 3 suddenly stiffened. The raging flames burning around its body seemed to grow fiercer. Amidst the flames, the remnants of the demonic body were burned to nothingness in an instant. The remaining parts carried the momentum of the impact and collided with the black plate. The flames exploded before it could even get close. The entire human-faced arachnid was turned into flying ash. The bits and pieces of ash fell onto the plate. Flying ash and smoke. Ouyang Qin and Child did not think so. It was just as they expected. As the flying ash fell onto the plate, the turbid mist of chaos element, which had been exhausted and dissipated, began to bubble up. It churned and rolled, quickly forming a scale. Suddenly, a long leg pierced out from within this turbid mist. With a few fiddles, the human-faced arachnid's ugly body propped itself up from within. Its eyes were bewildered with 6 colors and its 8 legs were divided. The flames on its body dissipated and it returned to its peak state. The only difference was that its body was much smaller. It was originally on the same level as the projection of the scales of truth. Now it had shrunk by several times. It was about the same size as the kite it had just swallowed. Replacing the kite, reducing the link, and reintegrating the chaos element. Unexpected, but reasonable. This is indeed in Wang's style. Ouyang Qin sighed. The chaos element, which had been utterly defeated, was clearly more efficient under the control of the human-faced arachnid. It was even able to absorb nutrients from the dark shadow domain, allowing it to continue to develop and grow stronger. This process of swallowing and replacing seemed logical, but it had to be known that the image of the kite had a rich inner meaning. It represented an extremely mature system of the order of justice and was the best choice for controlling the element of chaos. The human-faced arachnid's level of power might be above in Wang's, but connecting it with the existing system of the order of justice was always a problem. Only an old powerhouse like Wang could debug a feasible plan to replace the kite in the shortest amount of time possible and successfully implement it. The most exquisite link was not the rebirth of the human-faced arachnid, but the union with the projection of the scales of truth. The miniature figure was no longer number 3's original body. It was its reflection in the scales of truth system. The real number 3 had already merged with the projection of the scales of truth. It was difficult to distinguish the real number 3 from the real scales of truth. But that was a problem on a different level. Ouyang Qin did not stop his advance. As he continued to approach the giant shadow pillar, he analyzed and illuminated the relevant areas, allowing the others to see the situation inside. There were not many people who still had the leisure to pay attention to this side, and Jing Xiao was probably one of them. This first priest had always been calm. However, in the face of the continuous and drastic changes in the situation, his brain was often shut down. It was only when 03 devoured the kite that he truly woke up. Jing Xiao clutched his chest. The kite had just been swallowed, and the related qi activity had been transferred and reconnected. It had almost paralyzed his heart, and now it was beating wildly in compensation. He was already considered lucky. The priests and knights around him had all fallen to the ground. No matter how the building beneath them shook, they could not feel anything. He did not know how many of them would wake up. He raised his head in a daze and looked into the depths of the shadow. Under the dual illumination of Ouyang Qin and the projection of the scales of truth, the shadow there was peeling off layer by layer. A portion of it was directly evaporated, while another portion was dissolved into the turbid fog of chaotic elements. It was certain that the projection of the scales of truth was using the dark shadow domain to rapidly increase the amount of chaotic elements on the secular side. This action was fruitful. One could see it from the current situation of the scales. The projection of the scales of truth shifted once more into an unbalanced state. But this time, the black plate was the one that continued to sink. This indicated that the weight of the two sides had begun to invert. Jing Xiao vaguely remembered that the appearance of this phenomenon was actually a preset condition when Enweng spread out the evolution field. Enweng had once told him that there might be a demon mentioned in the Holy Scripture that would take their place and contend against the nearly undefeatable Fairchild. Now, the demon had truly come. Moreover, the demon's strength might far surpass that of the years of truth. Beneath the thick layer of clouds is an island covered in boiling magma. The demon carries chains on its back as it travels through the clouds. Was this Enweng's verification? Right now, he could not see the island or the chains, but there were layers of clouds and demons. Half of the Holy Scripture's account had been verified. In that case, he could say with a bit of caution that the gate of truth really did exist. Was it really in Xia City? Jing Xiao's face twitched slightly. If tonight was just a verification, then their mission would have been perfectly completed. They could retreat with success. But the current Enweng was probably thinking differently. The body transforms into a sacrificial vessel, stealing the sky and swapping the sun. According to the ritual of the church, Enweng, you're thinking of. Jing Xiao had just sorted out an idea. The white plate that was constantly rising upward was constructed by the evolution field. After the projection of the scales of truth, an image appeared for the first time. The weaker side no longer had the qualifications to remain anonymous. The first thing that appeared was the structure of a kite shield. A mercury-like glow flowed on its surface. This was the reflection of the shield of truth. It undoubtedly represented Fairchild. Jing Xiao cast his gaze toward Building A, but he could not see anything due to the dark clouds and turbid mist. He did not know what kind of mood Fairchild was in right now. But then, an unexpected change occurred. The projection of the kite shield had just appeared when another light and shadow appeared. This one was much more concise. It was the composition of a tetrahedron with an inscribed sphere and an outer scribed sphere. Jing Xiao had seen it not too long ago. The format pyramid. Jing Xiao's brain nearly crashed once more. That Luo Nan. When did he go up? The scales of truth could not just go up on a whim. The operating steps inside were very complex. They required an extremely tight foundation and connection of energy. Only Wang could carry out such operations. Considering the time conditions, this meant that when number 3 flew through the air and encountered dangerous situations, she had been dealing with Luo Nan. No matter how much weight Luo Nan occupied, the side of the white plate that carried him and Fairchild clearly could not compare to the other side, which was filled with chaotic and disorderly elements. Right now, the weights in Wang's hands were not too few. They were too many. He could easily deploy them. As long as he could bear the pressure of the demon behind the shadows, as long as he could endlessly obtain weights from the shadows, it would be very difficult to break this advantage. For this reason, Wang added the final stroke to his own plan. On top of the black plate, the human-faced arachnid suddenly opened its mouth and inhaled. It swallowed a portion of the turbid mist surrounding it into its stomach. It was unknown how the human-faced arachnid operated, but the constantly tilting scales actually began to return to normal. As it swayed, the black and white plates rose and fell. The human-faced arachnid also swallowed clouds of mist. Clearly, it was switching weights and searching for a point of balance. With enough weights, this was far too easy. The black and white plates appeared on a horizontal line once more, fulfilling the requirements of the Order's holy object. It was like a fully matured seed that was buried in the void. Chapter 252. What happened? Luo Nan's mental senses chased after Wang, observing the logic world with his clairvoyance. He understood some of the changes in the situation, but he only understood half of them. By the time the giant cocoon of light appeared, he vaguely knew that he had reached the most crucial stage. However, he was limited by his level of understanding. His thoughts were stuck here, and it was hard for him to continue. He could only continuously increase the precision of his senses and observe seriously. Even though this consumed 10 to 100 times more mental energy than the life sketches he had just comprehended, he felt that it was necessary. At this time, an indescribable light shone out from the projection of the scales of truth. One could not see anything by just sensing it, but under this light, the black and white plates of the scales of truth instantly lost their color. Black was no longer black, and white was no longer white. It was as if some crucial element had been extracted. It was as if they had been dyed together, indistinguishable. It was this indescribable light that soundlessly opened up a region within the shadow pillar. Its appearance was similar to the cocoon of light that the first ablatums constructed the evolution field. It was just that it was 10 times larger. The projection of the scales of truth resided in the center of the cocoon of light. Light and shadow interweaved, forming countless lines of varying thickness. At first glance, they looked like branches that were spreading out. They grew endlessly, and some even wrapped around the two plates. The young branches spiraled and pierced into the projection above. It didn't matter if it was the human-faced arachnid, the kite shield, or the format pyramid. Because of this, the 3 projection diagrams underwent changes at the same time. Light and shadow warped slightly, and their structures melted. Holy space, extraordinary substitution. Ouyang Chen's body was covered in layers of ripples, offsetting the resistance of the shadow pillar. He approached the cocoon of light step by step. The front of the ripples had already made contact with the cocoon of light, undulating and rippling. Although his progress was not slow, he still frowned when he saw the cocoon of light form and the ripples transform. You've gone from a small substitution of worldly objects to a large substitution of the extraordinary domain. And Wang, your moves are truly extraordinary. However, has your first ablatum allowed you to borrow the power of the scales of truth? There was no response from within the cocoon of light, but Luo Nan's heart inexplicably palpitated. Substitution. He understood a bit. At this moment, the two ends of the scales, the human-faced arachnid, him, and Fairchild, were they exchanging places? No, it wasn't. After all, the two altar frameworks were still entangled. And Wang had placed Luo Nan on the scales of truth, so the two frameworks were destined to form a close connection. Luo Nan could roughly sense that the two ends of the scale had merely blurred the boundary between chaos and order. There was no relationship of substitution between the two. It was more like a sort of blending. Together, they formed a sort of indescribable existence, and they used this as a foundation to grow and strengthen without end. As for the replacement, it happened on an even more mysterious level, and he had no idea what it was at the moment. But the human-faced arachnid, Fairchild, and Luo Nan were all unavoidably affected by the exchange. They were all greatly affected. The rooftop of building A had already collapsed. Amid the dust and debris, Fairchild raised his hands and stared at it. He watched as the flowing mercury light dimmed layer by layer, his face expressionless. Luo Nan swept his eyes over this scene. He was slightly startled, and his heart suddenly throbbed, not good. Even Child was in trouble, let alone him. Something was definitely going to happen on the main body's side. The melting of the format pyramid structure on the scales of truth was an ominous sign. Hiss, Luo Nan's mind returned to his main body, and he drew in a breath of cold air. He was cut in half. Ever since Wang pulled him into the framework of the altar of the scales of truth, he had been unable to get rid of the feeling of restraint. Now, this feeling had intensified. His blood and energy were blocked and blocked, causing many parts of his body to feel numb. His control over his body had dropped substantially. In contrast, his internal organs, which lacked sensory nerves, seemed to have rebelled. The diffuse sensation of pain caused many of his internal organs to convulse. This caused Luo Nan's body to begin to tremble lightly. In the end, he even began to sway. On the AR interface, at least 7 or 8 diagrams simultaneously displayed the color of blood red, signifying danger. The whispers and conversations within the vehicle were swept clean in an instant. All that was left were the beeping sounds of the instrument's alarm, rising and falling, interweaving together. Internal organ dysfunction. Hold him up. Bai Xinyan's command rang out, but it soon faded away. This was because at this very moment, a lava-like heat poured down from the top of Luo Nan's head. His brain seemed to be boiling, and it was as if someone had given him a heavy punch. His mind was dizzy, and his consciousness was dazed. His mental senses lost their accuracy, and his clairvoyance became blurry and indistinct. His headquarters had actually been raided. Luo Nan did his best to calm his mind, hoping to recover his clarity of mind. But even though his thoughts were a mess, he knew that Wang had certainly used the scales of truth and the enormous cocoon of light that had just been erected. That old fellow had really struck Luo Nan's weak spot in an instant. This wouldn't do. Luo Nan felt the incorporeal net on his body rapidly tighten. It had already bound his body tightly, and it traced all the way up. It wanted to completely seal off all of the transformations of his body and soul. When that happened, he would truly be waiting for death. The unforeseen event happened too suddenly. Luo Nan had no time to consider anything else. Before the incorporeal net was about to close, Luo Nan completely obeyed his instincts. He visualized the formatting pagoda and commanded the wraith sign to exert force. Amidst the trembling of the chains, Luo Nan's soul left his body and ascended. He took a step into the depths of the mental plane. The incorporeal net closed, but it was a step too late. In the instant his soul left his body, Luo Nan could clearly hear the snapping sounds of tree branches snapping. There was also quite a bit of resistance present. Fortunately, his method of leaving his body was to borrow external force. It was close to being rough, directly charging into the depths of the mental plane. Otherwise, he might not have been able to succeed in one go. As for now, Luo Nan's mind suddenly became clear after his body and soul separated. His mental senses stabilized once more. The most miraculous thing was that the feeling of pain in his main body instantly disappeared by quite a bit. Yes, and Wang had used the blessing of the Shield of Truth to make an issue out of it. Luo Nan had forcibly left his body, breaking the mode of interference between the mental and the material. Naturally, he had broken free of the shackles. He was no longer restricted by them. It was just that nothing could ever be perfect. Though he had dodged a calamity, he had lost control of his main body. Before he could lay down, he fell backward and directly fell into Zhang Yingying's embrace. He lost all sensation. The carriage was in a flurry of activity. The situation looked as if Luo Nan was about to breathe his last in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan could not care about what would happen to his main body next. Though he had broken An Wang's plan, it was still impossible for him to completely break free from this vortex. As long as the conflict between the altar frame and the scales of truth and the formatting pagoda were still entangled, it was impossible for him to truly remain uninvolved. Right now, the results of Luo Nan's escape were directly reflected on the projection of the scales of truth within the so-called holy space. The formatting pagoda still existed, but it had faded quite a bit. More importantly, the state of warping and melting had reversed, returning it to a complete state. This change was neither too big nor too small, but it directly disturbed the balanced state of fusion between chaos and order. The growth of the branches within the cocoon of light came to a halt. Some of them even withered in an instant. Chapter 253. Sheng Xiao could not help but sigh. Those who were still paying attention to the cocoon of light, the changes in the holy space, were all people with discerning eyes. The minute changes inside could not be hidden from anyone. He knew that An Wang had not tricked him lightly, but they were of the same order, so he unconsciously leaned to the side. He was a clear-sworn first ablatum. He was familiar with the classics and knew how valuable the holy space represented by the cocoon of light was. When they had set up the evolution field, the external magic arrays were similar in shape. However, upon closer inspection, they were merely mechanical imitations. The current holy space was a domain formed by the holy object after achieving an exquisite balance. When the holy space was set up, the objects that achieved balance, whether it was chaos or order, would become sacrifices for the exchange. They would become the stepping stones to the extraordinary domain. This was the true path to the heavens of the one-step extraordinary. The Order of Justice viewed the holy space as the mother of the Holy Spirit. As long as the sacrifices on the scales of truth could make up for the consumption, even an extraordinary could be born from nothing. At the very least, every generation of first ablatums had achieved this through the great exchange of the holy space. They represented the blessing and supreme authority of the holy object. It was by relying on this inconceivable power that the Order of Justice was able to maintain a steady increase in the number of high-level experts for the past 40 years. They were able to spread their teachings to the entire world and become one of the three great secret orders. Sheng Xiao pondered. An Wang's fleshly body was completely destroyed. There was a 70 to 80% chance that he would use this technique to reconstruct his fleshly body, the so-called Holy Spirit body. This was also the most common use of the Great Exchange. 09 small say net, if he succeeded, the Order of Justice would gain another extraordinary. Although the price he paid tonight was disastrous, it was still worth it. However, there was a flaw now. There was a problem at the root. Even if the body was successfully reconstructed, the so-called extraordinary could no longer be mentioned. It was a huge loss. The withering of the branches continued. Even though a considerable portion was growing to make up for the gap, the phenomenon of withering and flourishing could not be eliminated in a short period of time. What was even more fatal was that with this delay, Yang Qin had already broken through the final obstruction of the shadow pillar. He stood outside the cocoon of light, within reach. Although the holy space had endless wondrous uses, it was never a sturdy barrier. No matter what, it could not withstand the attack of an extraordinary. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. "And Wang, are you there?" A strange greeting suddenly sounded. Zheng Xiao opened his eyes in astonishment. He saw Ouyang standing outside the cocoon of light. He stretched out his hand and lightly knocked on the cocoon's outer shell, as if he was a guest who had come to pay a visit. He was polite and courteous. Although the sound was a bit loud, it could still be clearly heard hundreds of meters away. The cocoon of light was silent. There was no response. Seeing this, Ouyang muttered to himself for a while. Then, he increased the strength of his fingers and pressed against the outer layer of the light cocoon. With the increase in strength, the outer shell of the light cocoon clearly sank, and the texture became obvious. It looked like a raw egg that had been peeled off and left with its membrane. It was translucent and could be pierced by a finger at any time. In the end, the holy space was not a raw egg. Under the influence of external stimuli, its feedback exceeded everyone's expectations. The cocoon of light was cramping like a living thing, like an enormous heart. The branches and veins inside broke out of the wall and spread out. The shadows, which had already faded away, gathered from the periphery. They came into contact with the veins, and it was as if they had been injected with fresh blood. They came alive in an instant, layer upon layer, pouncing over to cover the cocoon of light, causing it to retreat into the depths of the shadows. At the same time, the logic world rumbled and shook. The enormous shadow pillar that had been smashed into the ground was uprooted and contracted upwards. Dark clouds and turbid mists surged like waves, assaulting one's face and causing one's heart to feel stifled. Like this. Zheng Xiao was a bit stunned, and a thought fiercely came to mind. Wrong. This isn't the forging of the Holy Spirit body at all. He's repeating his previous actions. He wants to control. Just like controlling the human-faced arachnid, and Wang clearly wanted to use the power of the enormous shadow pillar and even the demon behind the scenes as a vessel for his soul to reside in. He wanted to achieve complete control. However, the consequences of Luo Nan's escape were showing themselves. The sound of thunder exploded. It was the roar of the demon behind the shadow pillar. Luo Nan did not reverse in Wang's direction, but the instantaneous change he created reduced the upper limits of Wang's control. The enormous shadow pillar was uprooted halfway and cracked apart with a hum. Dark shadow clouds pervaded everywhere, flooding the entire logic world. No one could dodge them. What was the difference between this and receiving an attack from a demon? Zheng Xiao's face turned green. He summoned his last bit of strength to instantly cast an incantation, erecting a transparent barrier around his body. He blocked the first wave of the shadow cloud's corrosion. However, not everyone was as lucky as him. The priests and knights of the order were enveloped by the black mist. It was as if they had been corroded by poisonous flames. Dark flames instantly ignited, and they were burned to ashes in a few breaths of time. These people had died unjustly, but they had fainted from the impact. After all, they did not suffer any pain. The ones who suffered the most were the Ablatum Knights. The corrosive attack of the shadow cloud was one thing, but what they faced was no longer an external threat. Instead, it was the shackles that had taken root in the depths of their bodies and souls over the years. They were the vessels for the magical power of the first Ablatums. This was also the source of their power. Right now, Wang's power was being channeled through this channel, giving them a boost. A boost that was completely out of control. The power of the demon's rampage far surpassed the limits of what they could endure. Muffled explosions rang out in the corner of the building. Foul blood blossomed. Several Ablatum Knights exploded one after another. At this point, the elite forces of the Order of Justice in Xia City were practically wiped out. 6 muffled explosions rang out in a row. Baze, who was just about to climb up to the rooftop, suddenly froze. His powerful body suddenly swelled up. His bones and muscles creaked and groaned. Just like that, he staggered up to the ruins of the rooftop that had already collapsed. It looked as if he would explode at any moment, but in the end, his powerful talent and the toughness of his fleshly body far surpassed that of the other Ablatum knights. Baze opened his mouth with great effort. His originally snow-white teeth were already soaked in blood. He roared with a hoarse voice. Fairchild. Fairchild, who was standing on the other side of the building, turned around when he heard the roar. Baze's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. He was already in a half-blind state, but he was still able to miraculously lock onto Fairchild's position. He roared once more and charged up. Baze only needed 2 steps to traverse a distance of several dozen meters. He smashed out with his fist. The already dim mercury-like radiance sputtered. The shield of truth was broken in one strike, and Fairchild's majestic body was blasted into the air. Baze chased after Fairchild at an even faster speed, bombarding him with a series of heavy punches. Die! 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 Baze's roar was devoid of any killing intent. It was just a venting of extreme pain. In the end, he simply tore apart all pretenses. Kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Come and kill me! The twisting tendons were like living snakes. They wandered around Baze's body, giving him absolute power. But at the same time, pain and despair were branded within. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.